The Bride of the Man-Horse by Lord Dunsany. Coffee Break Collection 30. Mythical Creatures. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Colleen McMahon. The Bride of the Man-Horse by Lord Dunsany. In the morning of his 250th year, Sheparok the centaur went to the golden coffer, wherein the treasure of the centaurs was, and taking from it the hoarded amulet that his father, Jishak, in the years of his prime, had hammered from mountain gold and set with opals bartered from the gnomes, he put it upon his wrist, and said no word, but walked from his mother's cavern. And he took with him, too, that clarion of the centaurs, that famous silver horn, that in its time had summoned to surrender 17 cities of man, and for 20 years had brayed at star-girt walls in the siege of Tholdenblarna, the citadel of the gods, what time the centaurs waged their fabulous war, and were not broken by any force of arms, but retreated slowly in a cloud of dust before the final miracle of the gods that they brought in their desperate need from their ultimate armory. He took it and strode away, and his mother only sighed and let him go. She knew that today he would not drink at the stream coming down from the terraces of Varpen Niger, the inner land of the mountains, that today he would not wonder a while at the sunset, and afterwards trot back to the cavern again, to sleep on rushes pulled by rivers that know not man. She knew that it was with him as it had been of old with his father, and with Gum, the father of Jishak, and long ago with the gods. Therefore she only sighed and let him go. But he, coming out from the cavern that was his home, went for the first time over the little stream, and going round the corner of the crags, saw glittering beneath him the mundane plain. And the wind of the autumn that was gilding the world, rushing up the slopes of the mountain, beat cold on his naked flanks. He raised his head and snorted. "I am a man-horse now," he shouted aloud, and leaping from crag to crag, he galloped by valley and chasm, by torrent bed and scar of avalanche, until he came to the wandering leagues of the plain, and left behind him forever the Athramanorian mountains. His goal was Redazula, the city of Sambaline. What legend of Sambaline's inhuman beauty, or of the wonder of her mystery, had ever floated over the mundane plain to the fabulous cradle of the centaur's race, the Athramanorian mountains, I do not know. Yet in the blood of man there is a tide, an old sea current rather, that is somehow akin to the twilight, which brings him rumors of beauty from however far away, as driftwood is found at sea from islands not yet discovered. And this spring tide of current that visits the blood of man comes from the fabulous quarter of his lineage, from the legendary, the old. It takes him out to the woodlands, out to the hills. He listens to ancient song. So it may be that Sheparok's fabulous blood stirred in those lonely mountains away at the edge of the world to rumors that only the airy twilight knew, and only confided secretly to the bat, for Sheparok was more legendary even than man. Certain it was that he headed from the first for the city of Zertazula, where Sambaline in her temple dwelt, though all the mundane plain, its rivers and mountains, lay between Sheparok's home and the city he sought. When first the feet of the centaur touched the grass of that soft alluvial earth, he blew for joy upon the silver horn. He pranced and caracoled. He gamboled over the leagues. Pace came to him like a maiden with a lamp, a new and beautiful wonder. The wind laughed as it passed him. He put his head down low to the scent of the flowers. He lifted it up to be nearer the unseen stars. He revelled through kingdoms, took rivers in his stride. How shall I tell you, ye that dwell in cities? How shall I tell you what he felt as he galloped? He felt for strength like the towers of Bel Narana, for lightness like those gossamer palaces that the fairy spider builds twixt heaven and sea along the coasts of Zith, for swiftness like some bird racing up from the morning to sing in some city's spires before daylight comes. He was the sworn companion of the wind. For joy he was as a song, The lightnings of his legendary sires, the earlier gods, began to mix with his blood. His hooves thundered. He came to the cities of men, and all men trembled, for they remembered the ancient mythical wars, and now they dreaded new battles and feared for the race of man. Not by Clio are these wars recorded. History does not know of them, but what of that? Not all of us have sat at historians' feet, but all have learned fable and myth at their mother's knees. And there were none that did not fear strange wars when they saw Sheparok swerve and leap along the public ways. So he passed from city to city. By night he lay down unpanting in the reeds of some marsh or a forest. Before dawn he rose triumphant, and hugely drank of some river in the dark, and splashing out of it would trot to some high place to find the sunrise, and to send echoing eastwards the exultant greetings of his jubilant horn. And lo, the sunrise coming up from the echoes, and the plains new lit by the day, and the leagues spinning by like water flung from a top, and that gay companion, the loudly laughing wind, and men and the fears of men and their little cities, and after that great rivers and waste spaces, and huge new hills, and then new lands beyond them, and more cities of men, and always the old companion, the glorious wind. Kingdom by kingdom slipped by, and still his breath was even. It is a golden thing to gallop on good turf in one's youth, said the young man-horse, the centaur. Ha ha, said the wind of the hills, and the winds of the plain answered. Bells pealed in frantic towers. Wise men consulted parchments. Astrologers sought of the portent from the stars. The aged made subtle prophecies. Is he not swift? Said the young. How glad he is, said children. Night after night brought him sleep, and day after day lit his gallop, till he came to the lands of the Athelonian men, who live by the edges of the mundane plain, and from them he came to the lands of legend again, such as those in which he was cradled on the other side of the world, and which fringe the marge of the world and mix with the twilight. And there a mighty thought came into his untired heart, for he knew that he neared Zretzazula now, the city of Cymbeline. It was late in the day when he neared it, and clouds colored with evening rolled low on the plain before him. He galloped on into their golden mist, and when it hid from his eyes the sight of things, the dreams in his heart awoke, and romantically he pondered all those rumors that used to come to him from Cymbeline, because of the fellowship of fabulous things. She dwelt, said evening secretly to the bat, in a little temple by a lone lake shore. A grove of cypresses screened her from the city, from Zretzazula of the climbing ways, and opposite her temple stood her tomb, her sad lake sepulchre with open door, lest her amazing beauty and the centuries of her youth should ever give rise to the heresy among men that lovely Cymbeline was immortal, for only her beauty and her lineage were divine. Her father had been half centaur and half god. Her mother was the child of a desert lion and that sphinx that watches the pyramids. She was more mystical than woman. Her beauty was as a dream, was as a song, the one dream of a lifetime dreamed on enchanted dews, the one song sung to some city by a deathless bird blown far from his native coast by storm in paradise. Dawn after dawn on mountains of romance, or twilight after twilight, could never equal her beauty. All the glowworms had not the secret among them, nor all the stars of the night. Poets had never sung it, nor evening guessed its meaning. The morning envied it. It was hidden from lovers. She was unwed, unwooed. The lions came not to woo her because they feared her strength, and the gods dared not love her because they knew she must die. This was what evening had whispered to the bat. This was the dream in the heart of Sheparok as he cantered blind through the mist. And suddenly there at his hooves, in the dark of the plain, appeared the cleft in the legendary lands, and Zretzazula sheltering in the cleft, and sunning herself in the evening. Swiftly and craftily he bounded down by the upper end of the cleft, and entering Zretzazula by the outer gate, which looks out sheer on the stars, he galloped suddenly down the narrow streets. many that rushed out onto balconies as he went clattering by, many that put their heads from glittering windows, are told of in olden song. Sheparok did not tarry to give greetings or to answer challenges from martial towers. He was down through the earthward gateway like the thunderbolt of his sires, and, like Leviathan who has leapt at an eagle, he surged into the water between temple and tomb. He galloped with half-shut eyes up the temple steps, and only seeing dimly through his lashes, seized Sambaline by the hair, undazzled as yet by her beauty, and so held her away, and, leaping with her over the floorless chasm where the waters of the lake fall unremembered away into a hole in the world, took her we know not where, to be her slave for all centuries that are allowed to his race. 3 blasts he gave as he went, upon that silver horn that is the world-old treasure of the centaurs. These were his wedding bells. End of Bride of the Man-Horse by Lord Dunsany. Recording by Colleen McMahon.
This is an excerpt from The Crock of Gold, Book 1, The Coming of Pan, by James Stephens. Coffee Break Collection 30, Mythical Creatures. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. This recording by Michelle Fry, Baton Rouge, Louisiana, in February 2021. The Coming of Pan by James Stephens. The only house near to her father's was that occupied by Bessie Hannigan. The other few houses were scattered widely, with long, quiet miles of hill and bog between them, so that Caitlin Nemuraku had hardly seen more than a couple of men beside her father since she was born. She helped her father and mother in all the small businesses of their house, and every day also she drove their 3 cows and 2 goats to pasture on the mountain slopes. Here, through the sunny days, the years had passed in a warm, slow thoughtlessness, wherein, without thinking, many thoughts had entered into her mind, and many pictures hung for a moment like birds in the thin air. At first, and for a long time, she had been happy enough. There were many things in which a child might be interested: the spacious heavens, which never wore the same beauty on any day, the innumerable little creatures living among the grasses or in the heather, the steep swing of the bird down from the mountain to the infinite plains below, the little flowers which were so contented each in its peaceful place, the bees gathering food for their houses, and the stout beetles who were always losing their way in the dusk. These things and many others interested her. The 3 cows, after they had grazed for a long time, would come and lie by her side and look at her as they chewed their cud, and the goats would prance from the bracken to push their heads against her breast, because they loved her. Indeed, everything in her quiet world loved this girl, but very slowly there was growing in her consciousness an unrest, a disquietude to which she had hitherto been a stranger. Sometimes an infinite weariness oppressed her to the earth. A thought was born in her mind, and it had no name. It was growing and could not be expressed. She had no words wherewith to meet it, to exercise or greet this stranger, who more and more insistently and pleadingly tapped upon her doors and begged to be spoken to, admitted and caressed and nourished. A thought is a real thing, and words are only its raiment, but a thought is as shy as a virgin. Unless it is fittingly apparelled, we may not look on its shadowy nakedness. It will fly from us and only return again in the darkness, crying in a thin, childish voice, which we may not comprehend until, with aching minds, listening and divining, we at last fashion for it those symbols which are its protection and its banner. So she could not understand the touch that came to her from afar, and yet how intimately the whisper, so aloof and yet so thrillingly personal. The standard of either language or experience was not hers. She could listen but not think. She could feel but not know. Her eyes looked forward and did not see. Her hands groped in the sunlight and felt nothing. It was like the edge of a little wind which stirred her tresses but could not lift them, or the first white peep of the dawn which is neither light nor darkness. But she listened, not with her ears, but with her blood. The fingers of her soul stretched out to clasp a stranger's hand, and her disquietude was quickened through with an eagerness which was neither physical nor mental, for neither her body nor her mind was definitely interested. Some dim region between these grew alarmed and watched and waited and did not sleep or grow weary at all. One morning she lay among the long warm grasses. She watched a bird who soared and sang for a little time, and then it sped swiftly down the steep air and out of sight in the blue distance. Even when it was gone, the song seemed to ring in her ears. It seemed to linger with her as a faint sweet echo, coming fitfully, with little pauses as though a wind disturbed it, and careless distant eddies. After a few moments she knew it was not a bird. No bird's song had that consecutive melody, for their themes are as careless as their wings. She sat up and looked about her, but there was nothing in sight. The mountains sloped gently above her and away to the clear sky. Around her the scattered clumps of heather were drowsing in the sunlight. Far below she could see her father's house, a little grey patch near some trees, and then the music stopped and left her wondering. She could not find her goats anywhere, although for a long time she searched. They came to her at last of their own accord from behind the fold in the hills, and they were more wildly excited than she had ever seen them before. Even the cows forsook their solemnity and broke into awkward gambols around her. As she walked home that evening, a strange elation taught her feet to dance. Hither and thither she flitted in front of the beasts, and behind them her feet tripped to a wayward measure. There was a tune in her ears, and she danced to it, throwing her arms out and above her head, and swaying and bending as she went. The full freedom of her body was hers now. The lightness and poise and certainty of her limbs delighted her, and the strength that did not tire delighted her also. The evening was full of peace and quietude. The mellow, dusky sunlight made a path for her feet, and everywhere through the wide fields birds were flashing and singing, and she sang with them a song that had no words and wanted none. The following day she heard the music again, faint and thin, wonderfully sweet, and as wild as the song of a bird, but it was a melody which no bird would adhere to. A theme was repeated again and again. In the middle of trills, grace notes, runs, and catches, it recurred with a strange, almost holy solemnity, a hushing, slender melody full of austerity and aloofness. There was something in it to set her heart beating. She yearned to it with her ears and her lips. Was it joy, menace, carelessness? She did not know, but this she did know, that however terrible, it was personal to her. It was her unborn thought, strangely audible and felt rather than understood. On that day she did not see anybody either. She drove her charges home in the evening listlessly, and the beasts also were very quiet. When the music came again, she made no effort to discover where it came from. She only listened, and when the tune was ended, she saw a figure rise from the fold of a little hill. The sunlight was gleaming from his arms and shoulders, but the rest of his body was hidden by the bracken, and he did not look at her as he went away playing softly on a double pipe. The next day he did look at her. He stood waist-deep in greenery, fronting her squarely. She had never seen so strange a face before. Her eyes almost died on him as she gazed, and he returned her look for a long minute, with an intent, expressionless regard. His hair was a cluster of brown curls, his nose was little and straight, and his wide mouth drooped sadly at the corners. His eyes were wide and most mournful, and his forehead was very broad and white. His sad eyes and mouth almost made her weep. When he turned away he smiled at her, and it was as though the sun had shone suddenly in a dark place, banishing all sadness and gloom. Then he went mincingly away. As he went, he lifted the slender double reed to his lips and blew a few careless notes. The next day he fronted her as before, looking down to her from a short distance. He played for only a few moments and fitfully, and then he came to her. When he left the bracken, the girl suddenly clapped her hands against her eyes, affrighted. There was something different, terrible about him. The upper part of his body was beautiful, but the lower part, she dared not look at him again. She would have risen and fled away, but she feared he might pursue her, and the thought of such a chase and the inevitable capture froze her blood. The thought of anything behind us is always terrible. The sound of pursuing feet is worse than the murder from which we fly. So she sat still and waited, but nothing happened. At last, desperately, she dropped her hands. He was sitting on the ground a few paces from her. He was not looking at her, but far away, sideways, across the spreading hill. His legs were crossed. They were shaggy and hoofed like the legs of a goat, but she would not look at these because of his wonderful, sad, grotesque face. Gaiety is good to look upon, and an innocent face is delightful to our souls, but no woman can resist sadness or weakness, and ugliness she dare not resist. Her nature leaps to be the comforter. It is her reason. It exalts her to an ecstasy wherein nothing but the sacrifice of herself has any proportion. Men are not fathers by instinct, but by chance, but women are mothers beyond thought, beyond instinct, which is the father of thought. Motherliness, pity, self-sacrifice, these are the charges of her primal cell, and not even the discovery that men are comedians, liars, and egotists will wean her from this. As she looked at the pathos of his face, she saw repudiated the hideousness of his body. The beast which is in all men is glossed by women. It is his childishness, the destructive energy inseparable from youth and high spirits, and it is always forgiven by women, often forgotten, sometimes and not rarely cherished and fostered. After a few moments of this silence, he placed the reed to his lips and played a plaintive little air, and then he spoke to her in a strange voice, coming like a wind from distant places. "What is your name, shepherd girl?" said he. "Caitlin Ingen de Muraku," she whispered. "Daughter of Muraku," said he, "I have come from a far place where there are high hills. The men and maidens who follow their flocks in that place know me and love me, for I am the master of the shepherds. They sing and dance and are glad when I come to them in the sunlight, but in this country no people have done any reverence to me. The shepherds fly away when they hear my pipes in the pastures. The maidens scream in fear when I dance to them in the meadows. I am very lonely in this strange country. You also, although you danced to the music of my pipes, have covered your face against me and made no reverence." "I will do whatever you say, if it is right," said she. "You must not do anything because it is right, but because it is your wish. Right is a word, and wrong is a word, but the sun shines in the morning, and the dew falls in the dusk, without thinking of these words, which have no meaning. The bee flies to the flower, and the seed goes abroad and is happy. Is that right, shepherd girl? It is wrong also. I come to you because the bee goes to the flower. It is wrong? If I did not come to you, to whom would I go? There is no right and no wrong, but only the will of the gods." "I am afraid of you," said the girl. "You fear me because my legs are shaggy like the legs of a goat. Look at them well, O maiden, and know that they are indeed the legs of a beast, and then you will not be afraid any more. Do you not love beasts? Surely you should love them, for they yearn to you, humbly or fiercely, craving your hand upon their heads as I do. If I were not fashioned thus, I would not come to you, because I would not need you. Man is a god and a brute. He aspires to the stars with his head, but his feet are contented in the grasses of the field, and when he forsakes the brute upon which he stands, then there will be no more men and no more women, and the immortal gods will blow this world away like smoke." "I don't know what you want me to do," said the girl. "I want you to want me. I want you to forget right and wrong, and be as happy as the beasts, as careless as the flowers and the birds, to live in the depths of your nature as well as to the heights. Truly there are stars in the heights, and they will be a garland for your forehead, but the depths are equal to the heights. Wondrous deep are the depths, very fertile is the lowest deep. There are stars there also, brighter than the stars on high. The name of the heights is wisdom, and the name of the depths is love. How shall they come together and be fruitful if you do not plunge deeply and fearlessly? Wisdom is the spirit and the wings of the spirit. Love is the shaggy beast that goes down. Gallantly he dives below thought, beyond wisdom, to rise again as high above these as he had first descended. Wisdom is righteous and clean, but love is unclean and holy. I sing of the beast in the descent, the great unclean purging itself in fire, the thought that is not born in the measure or the ice or the head, but in the feet and the hot blood and the pulse of fury. The crown of life is not lodged in the sun. The wise gods have buried it deeply where the thoughtful will not find it, nor the good, but the gay ones, the adventurous ones, the careless plungers, they will bring it to the wise and astonish them. All things are seen in the light. How shall we value that which is easy to see? But the precious things which are hidden, they will be more precious for our search. They will be beautiful with our sorrow. They will be noble because of our desire for them. Come away with me, shepherd girl, through the fields, and we will be careless and happy, and we will leave thought to find us when it can, for that is the duty of thought, and it is more anxious to discover us than we are to be found. So Caitlin Nemurku arose and went with Pan through the fields, and she did not go with him because of love, nor because his words had been understood by her, but only because he was naked and unashamed. End of an excerpt from The Coming of Pan by James Stephen. Recording by Michelle Fry, Baton Rouge, Louisiana.
This is the Creature There Has Never Been by Rainier Maria Rilke. Coffee Break Collection 30. Mythical Creatures. This is the creature there has never been. They never knew it, and yet, nonetheless, they loved the way it moved, its suppleness, its neck, its very gaze mild and serene. Not there, because they loved it, it behaved as though it were. They always left some space, and in that clear, unpeopled space they saved, it lightly reared its head, with scarce a trace of not being there. They fed it, not with corn, but only with the possibility of being, and that was able to confer such strength, its brow put forth a horn, one horn. Whitely it stole up to a maid, to be within the silver mirror, and in her. End of This is the Creature There Has Never Been by Rainier Maria Rilke. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain.
The Dwarf People by Clara K. Bayliss. Coffee Break Collection, Volume 30. Mythical Creatures. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Piotr Natter. The Dwarf People by Clara K. Bayliss. Very long ago, before the white people ever came into the land of the Eskimo, there was a large village at Pikmiktal-ik. One winter day the people living there were surprised to see a small man and a small woman with a child coming down the river on the ice. The man was so little that he wore a coat made of a single white fox skin. The woman's coat was made from the skins of 2 white hares, while 2 muskrat skins clothed the child. The father and mother were about 2 cubits high, and the boy not over the length of one's forearm. Though he was so small, the man was dragging a sled much larger than those used by the villagers, and he had on it a heavy load of various articles. He seemed surprisingly strong, and when they came to the shore below the village, he easily drew the sled up the steep bank, and taking it by the rear end, raised it on the sled frame, a feat which would have required the strength of several of the villagers. The couple entered one of the houses and were made welcome. The small family remained in the village for some time, the man taking his place among the other men, and seeming entirely at home and friendly. He was very fond of his little son, but one day, when the latter was playing outside the house, he was bitten so badly by a savage dog that he died. In his anger the father caught the dog up by the tail and struck it against a post so violently that the dog fell in halves. In his great sorrow the father made a handsome, carved grave box for his son and placed the child with his toys in it. Then he went into his house, and for 4 days he did no work and would see no one. At the end of that time he took his sled and with his wife returned up the river on their old trail, while the villagers sorrowfully watched them go, for they had come to like the pair very much. Before this time the villagers had always made the body of their sleds from long strips of wood running lengthwise, but after they had seen the dwarf's sled with many crosspieces they adopted that model. Before this time, too, they had always cast their dead out on the tundra to be devoured by the dogs and wild beasts, but after they had seen the dwarf people bury their son in a grave box with toys placed about him, they buried their dead in that way, and observed 4 days of mourning as had been done by the dwarf, for they liked him and his gentle manners. And ever since that time the hunters coming home at dusk and looking toward the darkening tundra, sometimes see dwarf people who carry bows and arrows, but who disappear into the ground if one tries to approach them. They are harmless people, never attempting to do anyone an injury. No one has ever spoken to these dwarfs since the time they left the village, but deer hunters have often seen their tracks near the foot of the mountains. End of The Dwarf People by Clara K. Bayliss. Independent Evidence for Fairies by Arthur Conan Doyle. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Read by Piotr Natter. By a curious coincidence, if it be indeed a coincidence, at the moment when the evidence for the actual existence of fairies was brought to my notice, I had just finished an article dealing with the subject, in which I gave particulars of a number of cases where such creatures were said to have been seen, and showed how very strong were the reasons for supposing that some such forms of life exist. I now reproduce this article, and I add to it another chapter containing fresh evidence, which reached me after the publication of the photographs in the Strand magazine. We are accustomed to the idea of amphibious creatures who may dwell unseen and unknown in the depths of the waters, and then some day be spied sunning themselves upon a sandbank, whence they slip into the unseen once more. If such appearances were rare, and if it should so happen that some saw them more clearly than others, then a very pretty controversy would arise, for the sceptics would say with every show of reason, our experience is that only land creatures live on the land, and we utterly refuse to believe in things which slip in and out of the water. If you will demonstrate them to us, we will begin to consider the question. Faced by so reasonable an opposition, the others could only mutter that they had seen them with their own eyes, but that they could not command their movements. The sceptics would hold the field. Something of the sort may exist in our psychic arrangements. One can well imagine that there is a dividing line, like the water edge, this line depending upon what we vaguely call a higher rate of vibrations. Taking the vibration theory as a working hypothesis, one could conceive that by raising or lowering the rate, the creatures could move from one side to the other of this line of material visibility, as the tortoise moves from the water to the land, returning for refuge to invisibility, as the reptile scuttles back to the surf. This, of course, is supposition, but intelligent supposition based on the available evidence is the pioneer of science, and it may be that the actual solution will be found in this direction. I am alluding now not to spirit return, where 70 years of close observation has given us some sort of certain and definite laws, but rather to those fairy and phantom phenomena which have been endorsed by so many ages, and still, even in these material days, seem to break into some lives in the most unexpected fashion. Victorian science would have left the world hard and clean and bare, like a landscape in the moon. But this science is in truth but a little light in the darkness, and outside that limited circle of definite knowledge we see the loom and shadow of gigantic and fantastic possibilities around us, throwing themselves continually across our consciousness in such a way that it is difficult to ignore them. There is much curious evidence of varying value concerning these borderland forms, which come or go either in fact or imagination, the latter most frequently no doubt. And yet there remains a residue which, by all human standards, should point to occasional fact. Lest I should be too diffuse, I limit myself in this essay to the fairies, and passing all the age-long tradition, which is so universal and consistent, come down to some modern instances which make one feel that this world is very much more complex than what we had imagined, and that there may be upon its surface some very strange neighbours who will open up inconceivable lines of science for our posterity, especially if it should be made easier for them, by sympathy or other help, to emerge from the deep and manifest upon the margin. Taking a large number of cases which lie before me, there are 2 points which are common to nearly all of them. One is that children claim to see these creatures far more frequently than adults. This may possibly come from greater sensitiveness of apprehension, or it may depend upon these little entities having less fear of molestation from the children. The other is that more cases are recorded in which they have been seen in the still shimmering hours of a very hot day than at any other time. The action of the sun upon the brain, says the sceptic. Possibly, and also possibly not. If it were a question of raising the slower vibrations of our surroundings, one could imagine that still, silent heat would be the very condition which might favour such a change. What is the mirage of the desert? What is that scene of hills and lakes which a whole caravan can see while it faces in a direction where for 1,000 miles of desert there is neither hill nor lake, nor any cloud or moisture to produce refraction? I can see the question, but I do not venture to give an answer. It is clearly a phenomenon which is not to be confused with the erect or often inverted image which is seen in a land of clouds and of moisture. If the confidence of children can be gained, and if they are led to speak freely, it is surprising how many claim to have seen fairies. My younger family consists of 2 little boys and 1 small girl, very truthful children, each of whom tells with detail the exact circumstances and appearance of the creature. To each it happened only once, and in each case it was a single little figure, twice in the garden, once in the nursery. Inquiry among friends shows that many children have had the same experience, but they close up at once when met by ridicule and incredulity. Sometimes the shapes are unlike those which they would have gathered from picture books. Fairies are like nuts and moss, says one child in Lady Glenconner's charming book of family life. My own children differ in the height of the creatures, which may well vary, but in their dress they are certainly not unlike the conventional idea, which, after all, may also be the true one. There are many people who have a recollection of these experiences of their youth, and try afterwards to explain them away on material grounds which do not seem adequate or reasonable. Thus, in his excellent book of folklore, the Reverend S. Baring Gould gives us a personal experience which illustrates several of the points already mentioned. In the year 1838 he says, "when I was a small boy of 4 years old, we were driving to Montpellier on a hot summer day over the long straight road that traverses a pebble and rubble strewn plain, on which grows nothing save a few aromatic herbs. I was sitting on the box with my father, when, to my great surprise, I saw legions of dwarfs of about 2 feet high, running along beside the horses. Some sat laughing on the pole, some were scrambling up the harness to get on the backs of the horses. I remarked to my father what I saw, when he abruptly stopped the carriage and put me inside beside my mother, where, the conveyance being closed, I was out of the sun. The effect was that, little by little, the host of imps diminished in number till they disappeared altogether." Here certainly the advocates of sunstroke have a strong, though by no means a final, case. Mr. Baring Gould's next illustration is a sounder one. "When my wife was a girl of 15," he says, "she was walking down a lane in Yorkshire, between green hedges, when she saw seated in one of the privet hedges a little green man, perfectly well made, who looked at her with his beady black eyes. He was about a foot or 15 inches high. She was so frightened that she ran home. She remembers that it was a summer day." A girl of 15 is old enough to be a good witness, and her flight and the clear detail of her memory point to a real experience. Again we have the suggestion of a hot day. Baring Gould has yet a third case. "One day a son of mine," he says, "was sent into the garden to pick pea pods for the cook to shell for dinner. Presently he rushed into the house as white as chalk, to say that while he was thus engaged, and standing between the rows of peas, he saw a little man wearing a red cap, a green jacket, and brown knee breeches, whose face was old and wan, and who had a grey beard and eyes as black and hard as sloes. He stared so intently at the boy that the latter took to his heels." Here again the pea pods show that it was summer, and probably in the heat of the day. Once again the detail is very exact and corresponds closely, as I shall presently show, to some independent accounts. Mr. Baring Gould is inclined to put all these down to the heat conjuring up the familiar pictures of fairy books, but some further evidence may cause the reader to doubt this explanation. Let us compare with these stories the very direct evidence of Mrs. Violet Tweedale, whose courage in making public the result of her own remarkable psychic faculties should meet with recognition from every student of the subject. Our descendants will hardly realise the difficulty which now exists of getting first-hand evidence with names attached, for they will have outgrown the state where the cry of "fake" and "fraud" and "dupe" is raised at once against any observer, however honourable and moderate, by people who know little or nothing of the subject. Mrs. Tweedale says: "I had a wonderful little experience some 5 years ago, which proved to me the existence of fairies. One summer afternoon I was walking alone along the avenue of Lupton House, Devonshire. It was an absolutely still day, not a leaf moving, and all nature seemed to sleep in the hot sunshine. A few yards in front of me my eye was attracted by the violent movements of a single long blade-like leaf of a wild iris. This leaf was swinging and bending energetically, while the rest of the plant was motionless. Expecting to see a field mouse astride it, I stepped very softly up to it. What was my delight to see a tiny green man. He was about 5 inches long, and was swinging back downwards. His tiny green feet, which appeared to be green booted, were crossed over the leaf, and his hands, raised behind his head, also held a blade. I had a vision of a merry little face and something red in the form of a cap on the head. For a full minute he remained in view, swinging on the leaf. Then he vanished. Since then I have several times seen a single leaf moving violently, while the rest of the plant remained motionless, but I have never again been able to see the cause of the movement." Here the dress of the fairy, green jacket and red cap, is exactly the same as was described independently by Baring Gould's son, and again we have the elements of heat and stillness. It may be fairly answered that many artists have drawn the fairies in such a dress, and that the colours may in this way have been impressed upon the minds of both observers. In the bending iris we have something objective, however, which cannot easily be explained away as a cerebral hallucination, and the whole incident seems to me an impressive piece of evidence. A lady with whom I have corresponded, Mrs. H., who is engaged in organizing work of the most responsible kind, has had an experience which resembles that of Mrs. Tweedale. "My only sight of a fairy," she says, "was in a large wood in West Sussex, about 9 years ago. He was a little creature, about half a foot high, dressed in leaves. The remarkable thing about his face was that no soul looked through his eyes. He was playing about in long grass and flowers in an open space." Once again summer is indicated. The length and colour of the creature correspond with Mrs. Tweedale's account, while the lack of soul in the eyes may be compared with the hard eyes described by young Baring Gould. One of the most gifted clairvoyants in England was the late Mr. Turvey, of Bournemouth, whose book, The Beginnings of Seership, should be in the library of every student. Mr. Lonsdale, of Bournemouth, is also a well-known sensitive. The latter has given me the following account of an incident which he observed some years ago in the presence of Mr. Turvey. "I was sitting," says Mr. Lonsdale, "in his company in his garden at Branksome Park. We sat in a hut which had an open front looking on to the lawn. We had been perfectly quiet for some time, neither talking nor moving, as was often our habit. Suddenly I was conscious of a movement on the edge of the lawn, which on that side went up to a grove of pine trees. Looking closely, I saw several little figures dressed in brown peering through the bushes. They remained quiet for a few minutes and then disappeared. In a few seconds a dozen or more small people, about 2 feet in height, in bright clothes and with radiant faces, ran on to the lawn, dancing hither and thither. I glanced at Turvey to see if he saw anything, and whispered, 'Do you see them?' He nodded. These fairies played about, gradually approaching the hut. One little fellow, bolder than the others, came to a croquet hoop close to the hut, and, using the hoop as a horizontal bar, turned round and round it, much to our amusement. Some of the others watched him, while others danced about, not in any set dance, but seemingly moving in sheer joy. This continued for 4 or 5 minutes, when suddenly, evidently in response to some signal or warning from those dressed in brown, who had remained at the edge of the lawn, they all ran into the wood. Just then a maid appeared coming from the house with tea. Never was tea so unwelcome, as evidently its appearance was the cause of the disappearance of our little visitors." Mr. Lonsdale adds, "I have seen fairies several times in the New Forest, but never so clearly as this. Here also the scene is laid in the heat of a summer day, and the division of the fairies into 2 different sorts is remarkably borne out by the general descriptions. Knowing Mr. Lonsdale as I do to be a respectable, well-balanced and honourable man, I find such evidence as this very hard to put to one side. Here at least the sunstroke hypothesis is negatived, since both men sat in the shade of the hut and corroborated the observation of the other. On the other hand, each of the men, like Mrs. Tweedale, was supernormal in psychic development, so that it might well happen that the maid, for example, would not have seen the fairies, even if she had arrived earlier upon the scene." End of Independent Evidence for Fairies by Arthur Conan Doyle. Independent Evidence for Fairies by Arthur Conan Doyle. Testimonials. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information, or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Read by Piotr Natter. I know a gentleman, belonging to one of the learned professions, whose career as, let us say, a surgeon, would not be helped if this article were to connect him with fairy lore. As a matter of fact, in spite of his solemn avocations and his practical and virile character, he seems to be endowed with that faculty, let us call it the appreciation of higher vibrations, which opens up so wonderful a door to its possessor. He claims, or rather he admits, for he is reticent upon the subject, that he has carried this power of perception on from childhood, and his surprise is not so much at what he sees as at the failure of others to see the same thing. To show that it is not subjective, he tells the story that on one occasion, while traversing a field, he saw a little creature which beckoned eagerly that he should follow. He did so, and presently saw his guide pointing with an air of importance to the ground. There, between the furrows, lay a flint arrowhead, which he carried home with him as a souvenir of the adventure. Another friend of mine who claims to have the power of seeing fairies is Mr. Tom Tyrrell, the famous medium, whose clairvoyance and general psychic gifts are of the strongest character. I cannot easily forget how one evening in a Yorkshire hotel a storm of raps, sounding very much as if someone were cracking their fingers and thumb, broke out around his head, and how, with his coffee cup in one hand, he flapped vigorously with the other to warn off his inopportune visitors. In answer to my question about fairies, he says: "Yes, I do see these little pixies, or fairies. I have seen them scores of times, but only in the woods and when I do a little fasting. They are a very real presence to me. What are they? I cannot say. I can never get nearer to the beggars than 4 or 5 yards. They seem afraid of me, and then scamper off up the trees like squirrels. I dare say if I were to go into the woods oftener I would perhaps gain their confidence more. They are certainly like human beings, only very small, say about 12 or 15 inches high. I have noticed they are brown in colour, with fairly large heads and standing up ears, out of proportion to the size of their bodies, and bandy legs. I am speaking of what I see. I have never come across any other clairvoyant who has seen them, though I have read that many do so. Probably they have something to do with nature processes. The males have very short hair, and the females have rather long, straight hair. The idea that these little creatures are occupied in consciously furthering nature's projects, very much I suppose as the bee carries pollen, is repeated by the learned Dr. Vanstone, who combines great knowledge of theory with some considerable experience, though a high development of intellect is, in spite of Swedenborg's example, a bar to psychic perception. This would show, if it is correct, that we may have to return to the classical conception of something in the nature of naiads and fauns and spirits of the trees and groves. Dr. Vanstone, whose experiences are on the borderland between what is objective and what is sensed without being actually seen, writes to me: "I have been distinctly aware of minute intelligent beings in connection with the evolution of plant forces, particularly in certain localities, for instance in Ecclesbourne Glen. Pond life yields to me the largest and best sense of fairy life, and not the floral world. I may be only clothing my subjective consciousness with unreal objective imaginations, but they are real to me as sentient, intelligent beings, able to communicate with us in varying distinctness. I am inclined to think that elemental beings are engaged, like factory hands, in facilitating the operation of nature's laws." Another gentleman who claims to have this most remarkable gift is Mr. Tom Charman, who builds for himself a shelter in the New Forest and hunts for fairies as an entomologist would for butterflies. In answer to my inquiries, he tells me that the power of vision came to him in childhood, but left him for many years, varying in proportion with his own nearness to nature. According to this seer, the creatures are of many sizes, varying from a few inches to several feet. They are male, female, and children. He has not heard them utter sounds, but believes that they do so, of finer quality than what we can hear. They are visible by night as well as by day, and show small lights about the same size as glow worms. They dress in all sorts of ways. Such is Mr. Charman's account. It is of course easy for us, who respond only to the more material vibrations, to declare that all these seers are self-deluded, or are the victims of some mental twist. It is difficult for them to defend themselves from such a charge. It is, however, to be urged upon the other side that these numerous testimonies come from people who are very solid and practical and successful in the affairs of life. One is a distinguished writer, another an ophthalmic authority, a third a successful professional man, a fourth a lady engaged on public service, and so on. To wave aside the evidence of such people on the ground that it does not correspond with our own experience is an act of mental arrogance which no wise man will commit. It is interesting to compare these various contemporary and first-hand accounts of the impressions which all these witnesses have received. I have already pointed out that the higher vibrations which we associate with hot sunshine, and which we actually seem to see in the shimmer of noontide, is associated with many of the episodes. Apart from this, it must be admitted that the evidence is on the whole irregular. We have creatures described which range from 5 inches to 2½ feet. An advocate of the fairies might say that, since the tradition has always been that they procreate as human beings do, we are dealing with them in every stage of growth, which accounts for the varying size. It seems to me, however, that a better case could be made out if it were pleaded that there have always been many different races of fairyland, and that samples of these races may greatly differ from each other and may inhabit varying spots, so that an observer like Mr. Tyrrell, for example, may always have seen woodland elves which bear no resemblance to gnomes or goblins. The monkey-like, brown-clad creatures of my professional friend, which were over 2 feet high, compare very closely with the creatures which little Baring Gould saw climbing on to the horses. In both cases these taller fairies were reported from flat, plain-like locations, while the little old man type varies completely from the dancing little feminine elf so beloved by Shakespeare. In the experience of Mr. Turvey and Mr. Lonsdale, 2 different types engaged in different tasks were actually seen at the same moment, the one being bright-coloured dancing elves, while the other were the brown-coloured attendants who guarded them. The claim that the fairy rings, so often seen in meadows or marshlands, are caused by the beat of fairy feet is certainly untenable, as they unquestionably come from fungi such as Agaricus gambosus or Marasmius oreadas, which grows from a centre, continually deserting the exhausted ground and spreading to that which is fresh. In this way a complete circle is formed, which may be quite small, or may be of 12-foot diameter. These circles appear just as often in woods from the same cause, but are smothered over by the decayed leaves among which the fungi grow. But though the fairies most certainly do not produce the rings, it might be asserted, and could not be denied, that the rings once formed, whatever their cause, would offer a very charming course for a circular ring-a-ring dance. Certainly from all time these circles have been associated with the gambols of the little people. After these modern instances, one is inclined to read with a little more gravity the account which our ancestors gave of these creatures, for however fanciful in parts, it still may have had some core of truth. I say our ancestors, but as a matter of fact there are shepherds on the South Downs to this day who will throw a bit of their bread and cheese over their shoulders at dinner time for the little folks to consume. All over the United Kingdom, and especially in Wales and Ireland, the belief is largely held among those folks who are nearest to nature. First of all, it was always supposed that they lived within the earth. This was natural enough, since a sudden disappearance of a solid body could only be understood in that way. On the whole, their description was not grotesque, and fits easily into its place amid the examples already given. They were of small stature, says one Welsh authority, quoted in Mrs. Lewis's Stranger Than Fiction, towards 2 feet in height, and their horses of the size of hares. Their clothes were generally white, but on certain occasions they have been seen dressed in green. Their gait was lively and ardent, and loving was their glance. They were peaceful and kindly among themselves, diverting in their tricks and charming in their walk and dancing. This mention of horses is somewhat out of the picture, but all the rest seems corroborative of what has already been stated. One of the best of the ancient accounts is that of the Rev. R. Kirk, who occupied a parish at Monteith on the edge of the Highlands, and wrote a pamphlet called The Secret Commonwealth about the year 1680. He had very clear and definite ideas about these little creatures, and he was by no means a visionary, but a man of considerable parts, who was chosen afterwards to translate the Bible into Erse. His information about fairies tallies very well with that of the Welshman quoted above. He slips up in imagining that flint arrowheads are indeed fairy bolts, but otherwise his contentions agree very well with our modern instances. They have tribes and orders, according to this Scottish clergyman; they eat, they converse in a thin whistling sort of language. They have children, deaths, and burials; they are fond of frolic dancing; they have a regular state and polity, with rulers, laws, quarrels, and even battles. They are irresponsible creatures, not hostile to the human race, unless they have reason to be angry, but even inclined to be helpful, since some of them, the Brownies, are, by universal tradition, ready to aid in the household work if the family has known how to engage their affection. An exactly similar account comes from Ireland, though the little folk seems to have imbibed the spirit of the island to the extent of being more mercurial and irascible. There are many cases on record where they are claimed to have shown their power, and to have taken revenge for some slight. In the Larne Reporter of March 31, 1866, as quoted in the True Irish Ghost Stories, there is an account of how a stone which the fairies claimed having been built into a house, the inhabitants were bombarded with stones by invisible assailants by day and night, the missiles hurting no one but causing great annoyance. These stories of stone throwing are so common and present such similar, well attested features in cases coming from every part of the world, that they may be accepted as a recognised preternatural phenomenon, whether it be the fairies or some other form of a mischievous psychic force which caused the bombardment. The volume already quoted gives another remarkable case, where a farmer, having built a house upon what was really a fairy right of way between two raths or fairy mounds, was exposed to such persecution by noises and other disturbances, that his family was at last driven out, and had to take refuge in the smaller house which they had previously occupied. This story is narrated by a correspondent from Wexford, who says that he examined the facts himself, examined the deserted house, cross-examined the owner, and satisfied himself that there were two raths in the vicinity, and that the house was in a dead line between them. I have particulars of a case in West Sussex which is analogous, and which I have been able to trace to the very lady to whom it happened. This lady desired to make a rock garden, and for this purpose got some large boulders from a field hard by, which had always been known as the Pixie Stones, and built them into her new rockery. One summer evening this lady saw a tiny grey woman sitting on one of the boulders. The little creature slipped away when she knew that she had been observed. Several times she appeared upon the stones. Later the people in the village asked if the stones might be moved back to the field, as, they said, they are the Pixie Stones, and if they are removed from their place, misfortunes will happen to the village. The stones were restored. But supposing that they actually do exist, what are these little creatures? That is a subject upon which we can speculate only, with more or less plausibility. Mr. David Gow, editor of Light and a considerable authority upon psychic matters, had first formed the opinion that they were simply ordinary human spirits, seen as it were at the wrong end of a clairvoyant telescope, and therefore very minute. A study of the detailed accounts of their varied experience caused him to alter his view, and to conclude that they are really life forms which have developed along some separate lines of evolution, and which, for some morphological reason, have assumed human shape in the strange way in which nature reproduces her types, like the figures on the mandrake root or the frost ferns upon the window. In a remarkable book, A Wanderer in the Spirit Lands, published in 1896, the author, Mr. Farnese, under inspiration gives an account of many mysteries, including that of fairies. What he says fits in very closely with the facts that have been put forward, and goes beyond them. He says, speaking of elementals, some are in appearance like the gnomes and elves who are said to inhabit mountain caverns. Such, too, are the fairies, whom men have seen in lonely and secluded places. Some of these beings are of a very low order of life, almost like the higher order of plants, save that they possess independent motion. Others are very lively and full of grotesque, unmeaning tricks. As nations advance and grow more spiritual, these lower forms of life die out from the astral plane of that earth's sphere, and succeeding generations begin at first to doubt and then to deny that they ever had any existence. This is one plausible way of explaining the disappearance of the faun, the dryad, the naiad, and the creatures which are alluded to with such familiarity in the classics of Greece and Rome. One may well ask what connection has this fairy lore with the general scheme of psychic philosophy. The connection is slight and indirect, consisting only in the fact that anything which widens our conceptions of the possible, and shakes us out of our time-rutted lines of thought, helps us to regain our elasticity of mind, and thus to be more open to new philosophies. The fairy question is infinitely small and unimportant compared to the question of our own fate and that of the whole human race. The evidence also is very much less impressive, though, as I trust I have shown, it is not entirely negligible. These creatures are in any case remote from us, and their existence is of little more real importance than that of strange animals or plants. At the same time, the perennial mystery why so many flowers are born to blush unseen, and why nature should be so lavish with gifts which human beings cannot use, would be solved if we understood that there were other orders of beings which used the same earth and shared its blessings. It is at the lowest an interesting speculation, which gives an added charm to the silence of the woods and the wilderness of the moorland. End of Independent Evidence for Fairies by Arthur Conan Doyle. Testimonials.
The Forsaken Merman by Matthew Arnold. Coffee Break Collection 30. Mythical Creatures. Recording by Joanna Michael Hoyt. The Forsaken Merman by Matthew Arnold. Come, dear children, let us away, down and away below. Now my brothers call from the bay, now the great winds shorewards blow, now the salt tides seaward flow, now the wild white horses play, champ and chafe and toss in the spray. Children dear, let us away, this way, this way. Call her once before you go, call once yet, in a voice that she will know. Margaret! Margaret! Children's voices should be dear. Call once more, to a mother's ear. Children's voices wild with pain. Surely she will come again. Call her once, and come away. This way, this way. Mother dear, we cannot stay. The wild white horses foam and fret. Margaret! Margaret! Come, dear children, come away down. Call no more. One last look at the white-walled town, and the little grey church on the windy shore. Then come down. She will not come, though you call all day. Come away. Come away. Children dear, was it yesterday we heard the sweet bells over the bay? In the caverns where we lay, through the surf and through the swell, the far-off sound of a silver bell. Sand-strewn caverns cool and deep, where the winds are all asleep, where the spent lights quiver and gleam, where the salt weed sways in the stream, where the sea beasts ranged all round feed in the ooze of their pasture ground, where the sea snakes coil and twine, dry their mail and bask in the brine, where great whales come sailing by, sail and sail with unshut eye round the world for ever and aye. When did music come this way? Children dear, was it yesterday? Children dear, was it yesterday? call yet once, that she went away. Once she sat with you and me on a red gold throne in the heart of the sea, and the youngest sat on her knee. She combed its bright hair and she tended it well, when down swung the sound of the far-off bell. She sighed. She looked up through the clear green sea. She said, I must go, for my kinsfolk pray in the little grey church on the shore today. 'Twill be Easter time in the world, ah me, and I lose my poor soul, merman, here with thee. I said, Go up, dear heart, through the waves, say thy prayer, and come back to the kind sea caves. She smiled. She went up through the surf in the bay. Children dear, was it yesterday? Children dear, were we long alone? The sea grows stormy, the little ones moan. Long prayers, I said, in the world they say. Come, I said, and we rose through the surf in the bay. We went up the beach in the sandy down where the sea stalks bloom, to the white-walled town, through the narrow paved streets where all was still, to the little grey church on the windy hill. From the church came a murmur of folk at their prayers, but we stood without in the cold blowing airs. We climbed on the graves, on the stones worn with rains, and we gazed up the aisle through the small leaded panes. She sat by the pillar. We saw her clear. Margaret hissed, Come quick, we are here. Dear heart, I said, we are here alone. The sea grows stormy, the little ones moan. But ah, she gave me never a look, for her eyes were sealed to the holy book. Loud prays the priest, shut stands the door. Come away, children, call no more. Come away, come down, call no more. Down, 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 down to the depths of the sea. She sits at her wheel in the humming town, singing most joyfully. Hark what she sings. O joy, from the humming street, and the child with its toy, from the priest and the bell and the holy well, from the wheel where I spun, and the blessed light of the sun. And so she sings her fill, singing most joyfully till the shuttle falls from her hand, and the whizzing wheel stands still. She steals to the window, and looks at the sand, and over the sand at the sea, and her eyes are set in a stare, and anon there breaks a sigh, and anon there drops a tear from a sorrow-clouded eye, and a heart sorrow-laden, a long, long sigh, for the cold strange eyes of a little mermaiden, and the gleam of her golden hair. Come away, away, children. Come, children, come down. The hoarse wind blows colder. Lights shine in the town. She will start from her slumber when gusts shake the door. She will hear the winds howling, will hear the waves roar. We shall see, while above us the waves roar and whirl, a ceiling of amber, a pavement of pearl, singing, Here came a mortal, but faithless was she, and alone dwell forever the kings of the sea. But, children, at midnight, when soft the winds blow, when clear falls the moonlight, when spring tides are low, when sweet airs come seaward from heaths starred with broom, and high rocks throw mildly on the blanched sands a gloom, up the still, glistening beaches, up the creeks we will hie, over banks of bright seaweed the ebb tide leaves dry. We will gaze from the sand hills at the white, sleeping town, at the church on the hillside, and then come back, down, singing, There dwells a loved one, but cruel is she. She left lonely forever the kings of the sea. End of The Forsaken Merman by Matthew Arnold. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain.
The Goblin of Adachigahara by Sadanami Sanjin. Translated by Yi Theodora Ozaki. Coffee Break Collection 30. Mythical Creatures. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Joanna Schreck, Indianapolis. The Goblin of Arachigahara by Sadanami Sanjin. Long, long ago, there was a large plain called Arachigahara in the province of Mutsu in Japan. This place was said to be haunted by a cannibal goblin who took the form of an old woman. From time to time, many travelers disappeared and were never heard of more, and the old women round the charcoal braziers in the evenings, and the girls washing the household rice at the wells in the mornings, whispered dreadful stories of how the missing folk had been lured to the goblin's cottage and devoured, for the goblin lived only on human flesh. No one dared to venture near the haunted spot after sunset, and all those who could avoided it in the daytime, and travelers were warned of the dreaded place. One day, as the sun was setting, a priest came to the plain. He was a belated traveler, and his robe showed that he was a Buddhist pilgrim, walking from shrine to shrine to pray for some blessing or to crave for forgiveness of sins. He had apparently lost his way, and as it was late, he met no one who could show him the road or warn him of the haunted spot. He had walked the whole day and was now tired and hungry, and the evenings were chilly, for it was late autumn, and he began to be very anxious to find some house where he could obtain a night's lodging. He found himself lost in the midst of the large plain, and looked about in vain for some sign of human habitation. At last, after wandering about for some hours, he saw a clump of trees in the distance, and through the trees he caught sight of the glimmer of a single ray of light. He exclaimed with joy, "Oh, surely that is some cottage where I can get a night's lodging." Keeping the light before his eyes, he dragged his weary, aching feet as quickly as he could towards the spot, and soon came to a miserable-looking little cottage. As he drew near, he saw that it was in a tumble-down condition. The bamboo fence was broken, and weeds and grass pushed their way through the gaps. The paper screens which serve as windows and doors in Japan were full of holes, and the posts of the house were bent with age and seemed scarcely able to support the old thatched roof. The hut was open, and by the light of an old lantern, an old woman sat industriously spinning. The pilgrim called to her across the bamboo fence and said, "O Ba-san, old woman, good evening. I am a traveler. Please excuse me, but I have lost my way and do not know what to do, for I have nowhere to rest tonight. I beg you to be good enough to let me spend the night under your roof." The old woman, as soon as she heard herself spoken to, stopped spinning, rose from her seat, and approached the intruder. "I am very sorry for you. You must indeed be distressed to have lost your way in such a lonely spot so late at night. Unfortunately, I cannot put you up, for I have no bed to offer you, and no accommodation whatsoever for a guest in this poor place." "Oh, that does not matter," said the priest. "All I want is a shelter under some roof for the night, and if you will be good enough just to let me lie on the kitchen floor, I shall be grateful. I am too tired to walk further tonight, so I hope you will not refuse me. Otherwise, I shall have to sleep out on the cold plain." And in this way he pressed the old woman to let him stay. She seemed very reluctant, but at last she said, "Very well, I will let you stay here. I can offer you a very poor welcome only, but come in now, and I will make a fire, for the night is cold." The pilgrim was only too glad to do as he was told. He took off his sandals and entered the hut. The old woman then brought some sticks of wood and lit the fire, and bade her guest draw near and warm himself. "You must be hungry after your long tramp," said the woman. "I will go and cook some supper for you." Then she went to the kitchen to cook some rice. After the priest had finished his supper, the old woman sat down by the fireplace, and they talked together for a long time. The pilgrim thought to himself that he had been very lucky to come across such a kind, hospitable old woman. At last the wood gave out, and as the fire died slowly down, he began to shiver with cold, just as he had done when he arrived. "I see you are cold," said the old woman. "I will go out and gather some wood, for we have used it all. You must stay and take care of the house while I am gone." "No, no," said the pilgrim. "Let me go instead, for you are old, and I cannot think of letting you go out to get wood for me this cold night." The old woman shook her head and said, "You must stay quietly here, for you are my guest." And she left him and went out. In a minute she came back and said, "You must sit where you are and not move, and whatever happens, don't go near or look into the inner room. Now mind what I tell you." "If you tell me not to go near the back room, of course I won't," said the priest, rather bewildered. The old woman then went out again, and the priest was left alone. The fire had died out, and the only light in the hut was that of a dim lantern. For the first time that night he began to feel that he was in a weird place, and the old woman's words, "Whatever you do, don't peep into the back room," aroused his curiosity and his fear. What hidden thing could be in that room that she did not wish him to see? For some long time the remembrance of his promise to the old woman kept him still, but at last he could no longer resist his curiosity to peep into the forbidden place. He got up and began to move slowly towards the back room. Then the thought that the old woman would be very angry with him if he disobeyed her made him come back to his place by the fireside. As the minutes went slowly by and the old woman did not return, he began to feel more and more frightened, and to wonder what dreadful secret was in the room behind him. He must find out. She will not know that I have looked unless I tell her. I will just have a peep before she comes back, said the man to himself. With these words he got up on his feet, for he had been sitting all this time in Japanese fashion with his feet under him, and stealthily crept towards the forbidden spot. With trembling hands he pushed back the sliding door and looked in. What he saw froze the blood in his veins. The room was full of dead man's bones, and the walls were splashed and the floor was covered with human blood. In one corner, skull upon skull rose to the ceiling. In another was a heap of arm bones, in another a heap of leg bones. The sickening smell made him faint. He fell backwards with horror, and for some time lay in a heap with fright on the floor, a pitiful sight. He trembled all over, and his teeth chattered. He could hardly crawl away from the dreadful spot. "How horrible!" he cried out. "What awful den have I come to in my travels? May Buddha help me, or I am lost. Is it possible that that kind old woman is really the cannibal goblin? When she comes back, she will show herself in her true character and eat me up at one mouthful." With these words his strength came back to him, and, snatching up his hat and staff, he rushed out of the house as fast as his legs could carry him. Out into the night he ran, his one thought to get as far as he could from the goblin's haunt. He had not gone far when he heard steps behind him and a voice crying, "Stop! Stop!" He ran on, redoubling his speed, pretending not to hear. As he ran, he heard the steps behind him come nearer and nearer, and at last he recognized the old woman's voice, which grew louder and louder as she came nearer. "Stop! Stop, you wicked man! Why did you look in the forbidden room?" The priest quite forgot how tired he was, and his feet flew over the ground faster than ever. Fear gave him strength, for he knew that if the goblin caught him, he would soon be one of her victims. With all his heart he repeated the prayer to Buddha, "Namu Amida Butsu, Namu Amida Butsu." And after him rushed the dreadful old hag, her hair flying in the wind and her face changing with rage into the demon that she was. In her hand she carried a large blood-stained knife, and she still shrieked after him, "Stop! Stop!" At last, when the priest felt he could run no more, the dawn broke, and with the darkness of night the goblin vanished and he was safe. The priest now knew that he had met the goblin of Arachigahara, the story of whom he had often heard but never believed to be true. He felt that he owed his wonderful escape to the protection of Buddha, to whom he had prayed for help, so he took out his rosary, and bowing his head as the sun rose, he said his prayers and made his thanksgiving earnestly. He then set forward for another part of the country, only too glad to leave the haunted plain behind him. End of The Goblin of Arachigahara by Sadanami Sanjin, translated by Yi Theodora Ozaki. Recording by Joanna Schreck, Indianapolis.
Jabberwocky by Lewis Carroll. Coffee Break Collection 30. Mythical Creatures. 'Twas brillig, and the slithy toves did gyre and gimble in the wabe. All mimsy were the borogoves, and the momraths outgrabe. Beware the Jabberwock, my son, the jaws that bite, the claws that catch. Beware the Jubjub bird, and shun the frumious Bandersnatch. He took his vorpal sword in hand, long time the maxome foe he sought. So rested he by the tum-tum tree, and stood a while in thought. And, as in uffish thought he stood, the Jabberwock with eyes of flame came whiffling through the tulgey wood, and burbled as it came. 1, 2, 1, 2, and through the vorpal blade went snicker-snack. He left it dead, and with its head he went galumphing back. "And hast thou slain the Jabberwock? Come to my arms, my beamish boy. O frabjous day, callooh, callay!" he chortled in his joy. 'Twas brillig, and the slithy toves did gyre and gimble in the wabe. All mimsy were the borogoves, and the momraths outgrabe. End of Jabberwocky by Lewis Carroll. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain.
King Diderik and the Lion's Fight with the Dragon by George Borrow. Coffee Break Collection 30. Mythical Creatures. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Sonia. King Diderik and the Lion's Fight with the Dragon by George Borrow. From Bern rode forth King Diderik, a stately warrior form. Engaged in fray, he found in the way a lion and ladly worm. They fought for a day, they fought for two, but ere the third was flown, the worm outfought the beast and brought to earth the lion down. Then cried the lion in his need, when he the warrior saw, "O aid me quick, King Diderik, to escape the dragon's claw. O aid me quick, King Diderik, for the mighty God thou fear'st, a lion save for the lion brave, which on thy shield thou bear'st. Come to my rescue, thou noble king, help, help me for thy name, upon thy targe I stand at large, glittering like a flame." Long, long stood he, King Diderik, deep musing thereupon. At length he cried, "Whatever betide, I'll help thee, noble one." It was Sir King Diderik, his good sword bare he made, with courage fraught the worm he fought, till blood tinged all the blade. The gallant lord would not delay, so fast his blows he dealt, he hacked and gored until his sword was sundered at the hilt. The lindworm took him upon her back, the horse beneath her tongue, to her mountain den she hurried them, to her 11 young. The horse she cast before her young, the man in a nook she throws. "Assuage your greed upon the steed, but I will to repose. I pray ye feed upon the steed, at present no more I can. When I upleap, refreshed from sleep, we'll feast upon the man." It was Sir King Diderik, in the hill he searched around, then helped by the lord, the famous sword, called Adelring, he found. Aye, there he found so sharp a sword, and a knife with a golden heft. King Siegfried, be God's grace with thee, for here thy life was reft. I've been with thee in many a fight, in many an inroad too, but that thy doom had been in this tomb, I never, never knew. It was Sir King Diderik would prove the falchion's might. He hewed upon the flinty stone till all around was light. It was the youngest lindworm saw the sparks the hill illume. Who dares awake the fiery snake in her own sleeping room? The lindworm gnashed its teeth with rage, its grinning fangs it showed. Who dares awake the mother snake? within her own abode. Then spake the other little ones from the dark nooks of the hill, "If from her sleep the old one leap, 'twill fare with thee but ill." Then answered Sir King Diderick, his eyes with fury gleam, "I will awake your mother snake with chilly, chilly dream. Your mother she King Siegfried slew, a man of noble line, I'll on ye all avenge his fall with this good hand of mine." And then awaked the Lindworm old, and on her fell such fear, "Who thus with riot disturbs my quiet? What noise is this I hear?" Then said King Diderick, "'Tis I, and this have I to say: Over hill and dale, 'neath thy crooked tail, thou brought'st me yesterday." "O hew me not, King Diderick, I'll give thee all my hoard; 'Twere best that we good friends should be, so cast away thy sword." "I pay no trust to thy false device, befool me thou wouldst fain, Full many hast thou destroyed ere now, thou never shalt again." "Hear me, Sir King Diderick, forbear to do me ill, And thee I'll guide to thy plighted bride, she's hidden in the hill." "Above by my head, King Diderick, is hung the little key, Below by my feet to the maiden sweet descend thou fearlessly." "Above by thy head, thou serpent cursed, to begin I now intend; Below by thy feet, as is full meet, I soon shall make an end." Then first the Laidly Worm he slew, and then her young he smote, But in vain did he try from the mountain to fly, for tongues of snakes thrust out. So then with toil in the rocky soil he dug a trench profound, That in the flood of serpent blood and bane he might not be drowned. Then bent the good King Diderick, on the lion he wroth became, "Banned, banned," said he, "may the lion be, confusion be his and shame. With subtle thought the brute has brought on me this grievous risk, Which I never had seen had he not been graved on my buckler's disk." And when the gallant lion heard the king bewail his hap, "Stand fast, good lord," the lion roared, "while with my claws I scrap." The lion scrapped, King Diderick hewed, bright sparks the gloom relieved; Unless the beast had the night released, he'd soon to death have grieved. So when he had slain the Laidly Worm, and her offspring all had killed, Escaped the knight to the morning light, with heavy cuirass and shield. And when he had now come out of the hill, for his gallant courser he sighed, With reason good he trust him could, for they had each other tried. "O there's no need to bewail the steed, which thou, Sir King, hast missed; I am thy friend, my back ascend, and ride wherever thou list." So he rode over the deepest dales, and over the verdant meads; The king he rode, the lion strode, through the dim forest glades. The lion and King Diderick together thenceforth remain, Each death had braved, and the other saved, from perils sore and pain. Wherever King Diderick rode in the fields, the lion beside him sped; When on the ground the knight sat down, in his bosom he laid his head. Wherefore they call him the Lion Knight, with fame that name he bore; Their love so great did never abate, until their dying hour. End of King Diderick and the Lion's Fight with the Dragon, by George Borrow.
This is an excerpt from The Crock of Gold by James Stephens, Chapter 5 and part of Chapter 6 and 8 on leprechauns. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. This recording is by Michelle Fry, Baton Rouge, Louisiana, in February 2021. Beginning at the end of Chapter 3. "Ha!" cried the philosopher, moving, if it were possible, even closer to his client. "Now we have it. It is the leprechauns of Gortnaclocamora took your washboard. Go to the Gort at once. There is a hole under a tree in the southeast of the field. Try what you will find in that hole." So Michal McMurricu went away and did as he had been bidden, and underneath the tree of Gortnaclocamora he found a little crock of gold. A leprechaun without a pot of gold is like a rose without perfume, a bird without a wing, or an inside without an outside. They considered that the philosopher had treated them badly, that his action was mischievous and unneighborly, and that until they were adequately compensated for their loss, both of treasure and dignity, no conditions other than those of enmity could exist between their people and the little house in the pine wood. Furthermore, for them the situation was cruelly complicated. They were unable to organize a direct personal hostility against their new enemy, because the thin woman of Inishmagroth would certainly protect her husband. She belonged to the Sidhe of Crogan Congail, who had relatives in every fairy fort in Ireland, and were also strongly represented in the forts and duns of their immediate neighborhoods. Notwithstanding this, they were unwilling to let the matter rest, and the fact that justice was out of reach only added fury to their anger. One of their number was sent to interview the thin woman of Inishmagroth, and the others concentrated nightly about the dwelling of Michal McMurricu in an endeavor to recapture the treasure which they were quite satisfied was hopeless. They found that Michal, who understood the customs of the earth folk very well, had buried the crock of gold beneath a thorn bush, thereby placing it under the protection of every fairy in the world, the leprechauns themselves included, and until it was removed from this place by human hands, they were bound to respect its hiding place and even guarantee its safety with their blood. The leprechauns who had been detailed to visit the thin woman of Inishmagroth duly arrived at the cottage in the pine wood and made his complaint. The little man wept as he told the story, and the two children wept out of sympathy for him. The thin woman said she was desperately grieved by the whole unpleasant transaction, and that all her sympathies were with Gortnaclocamora, but that she must disassociate herself from any responsibility in the matter, as it was her husband who was the culpable person. As her husband was away in a distant part of the wood, nothing further could be done at that time, so the leprechaun returned again to his fellows without any good news, but he promised to come back early on the following day. When the leprechaun came through the pine wood on the following day, he met two children at a little distance from the house. He raised his open right hand above his head, this is both the fairy and the Gaelic form of salutation, and would have passed on, but that a thought brought him to a halt. Sitting down before the two children, he stared at them for a long time, and they stared back at him. At last he said to the boy, "What is your name, Big Vico?" "Seamus Beg, sir," the boy replied. "It's a little name," said the leprechaun. "It's what my mother calls me, sir." "What does your father call you?" "Seamus Rogan Muldoon O'Carroll McAdroid." "It's a big name," said the leprechaun, and he turned to the little girl. "What is your name, Michaelin Vigo?" "Bridget Beg, sir." "Well, Seamusine and Bridine, you are good little children, and I like you very much. Health be with you until I come see you again." And then the leprechaun went back the way he had come. As he went, he made little jumps and cracked his fingers, and sometimes he rubbed one leg against the other. "That's a nice leprechaun," said Seamus. "I like him too," said Bridget. The next day the leprechaun came again. He sat down beside the children, and, as before, he was silent for a little time. "Are you not going to ask us our names, sir?" said Seamus. His sister smoothed out her dress shyly. "My name, sir, is Bridget Beg." "Did you ever play jackstones?" said the leprechaun. "No, sir," replied Seamus. "I'll teach you how to play jackstones," and he picked up some pine cones and taught the children that game. "Did you ever play ball in the decker?" "No, sir," said Seamus. "Did you ever play I can make a nail with my re-ro daddy-o? I can make a nail with my re-ro ray?" "No, sir," replied Seamus. "It's a nice game," said the leprechaun, "and so is Cape on the Back, and 24 yards on the billy goat's tail, and towns, and Urlevo, and leapfrog. I'll teach you all these games, and I'll teach you how to play knifey, and hole and taw, and hornies and robbers. Leapfrog is the best one to start with, so I'll teach it to you at once. Let you bend down like this, Bridine, and you bend down like that a good distance away, Seamus. Now I jump over Bridine's back, and then I run and jump over Shamasine's back like this. And then I run ahead again, and I bend down. Now, Bridine, you jump over your brother, and then you jump over me, and run a good bit on, and bend down again. Now, Seamus, it's your turn. You jump over me, and then over your sister, and then you run on and bend down again, and I jump." "This is a fine game, sir," said Seamus. "It is, Vic Vig. Keep in your head," said the leprechaun. "That's a good jump. You couldn't beat that jump, Seamus." "I can jump better than Bridget already," replied Seamus, "and I'll jump as well as you do when I get more practice. Keep it in your head, sir." Almost without noticing it, they had passed through the edge of the wood, and were playing into a rough field which was cumbered with big gray rocks. Near a corner of this field there was a broad, low tree, and as they played they came near and nearer to it. The leprechaun gave a back very close to the tree. Seamus ran and jumped and slid down a hole at the side of the tree. Then Bridget ran and jumped and slid down the same hole. "Dear me," said Bridget, and she flashed out of sight. The leprechaun cracked his fingers and rubbed one leg against the other, and then he also dived into the hole and disappeared from view. When the time at which the children usually went home had passed, the thin woman of Inishmagroth became a little anxious. She had never known them to be late for dinner before. The evening wore on to the night, and while she waited for the philosopher to come in, she reviewed the situation. Her husband had not come in, the children had not come in, the leprechaun had not returned as arranged. A light flashed upon her. The leprechaun had kidnapped her children. She announced a vengeance against the leprechauns which would stagger humanity. While in the extreme center of her ecstasy, the philosopher came through the trees and entered the house. "Husband," said she, "the leprechauns of Gortnaclocamora have kidnapped our children." The thin woman of Inishmagroth slept very late that morning. Immediately after she had eaten, she put on her bonnet and shawl, and went through the pine wood in the direction of Gortnaclocamora. In a short time she reached the rocky field, and walking over to the tree in the southeast corner, she picked up a small stone and hammered loudly against the trunk of the tree, giving 2 knocks, and then 3 knocks, and then 1 knock. A voice came up from the hole. "Who is that, please?" said the voice. "Ban Droid of Inishmagroth, and well you know it," was her reply. "I am coming up, noble woman," said the voice, and in another moment the leprechaun leaped out of the hole. "Where are Seamus and Bridget Beg?" said the thin woman sternly. "How would I know where they are?" replied the leprechaun. "Wouldn't they be at home now?" "If they were at home, I wouldn't have come here looking for them," was her reply. "It is my belief that you have them." "Search me," said the leprechaun, opening his waistcoat. "They are down there in your little house," said the thin woman angrily, "and the sooner you let them up, the better it will be for yourself and your 5 brothers. "Noble woman," said the leprechaun, "you can go down yourself into our little house and look. I can't say fairer than that." "I wouldn't fit down there," said she. "I am too big." "You know the way for making yourself little." "But I mightn't be able to make myself big again," said the thin woman, "and then you and your dirty brothers would have it all your own way. If you don't let the children up," she continued, "I shall raise the Sidhe of Croaghancongale against you. If the children are not back in my house before moonrise this night, I'll go round to my people. Just tell that to your 5 ugly brothers. Health with you," she added, and strode away. "Health with yourself, noble woman," said the leprechaun, and he stood on one leg until she was out of sight, and then he slid down into the hole again. When the children leaped into the hole at the foot of the tree, they found themselves sliding down a dark, narrow slant, which dropped them softly enough into a little room. The room was hollowed out immediately under the tree, and great care had been taken not to disturb any of the roots which ran here and there through the chamber in the strangest criss-cross twisted fashion. To get across such a place one had to walk round and jump over and duck under perpetually. Some of the roots had formed themselves very conveniently into low seats and narrow uneven tables, and at the bottom all the roots ran into the floor and away again in the direction required by their business. After the clear air outside, this place was very dark to the children's eyes, so that they could not see anything for a few minutes. The first things they became aware of were 6 small men who were seated on low roots. They were all dressed in tight green clothes and little leathern aprons, and they wore tall green hats which wobbled when they moved. They were all busily engaged making shoes. One was drawing out wax ends on his knee, another was softening pieces of leather in a bucket of water, another was polishing the instep of a sole with a piece of curved bone, another was paring down a heel with a short broad-bladed knife, and another was hammering wooden pegs into a sole. He had all the pegs in his mouth, which gave him a wide-faced, jolly expression, and according as a peg was wanted, he blew it into his hand and hit it twice with his hammer, and then he blew another peg. And he always blew the peg with the right end uppermost, and never had to hit it more than twice. He was a person well worth watching. The children had slid down so unexpectedly that they almost forgot their good manners, but as soon as Seamus Beg discovered that he was really in a room, he removed his cap and stood up. "God be with all here," said he. The leprechaun who had brought them lifted Bridget from the floor, to which amazement still constrained her. "Sit down on that little root, child of my heart," said he, "and you can knit stockings for us." "Yes, sir," said Bridget meekly. The leprechaun took 4 knitting needles and a ball of green wool from the top of a high horizontal root. He had to climb over, go around 3, and climb up 2 roots to get at it, and he did this so easily that it did not seem a bit of trouble. He gave the needles and wool to Bridget Beg. "Do you know how to turn the heel, Bridget Beg?" said he. "No, sir," said Bridget. "Well, I'll show you how when you come to it." The other 6 leprechauns had ceased work and were looking at the children. Seamus turned to them. "God bless the work," said he politely. One of the leprechauns, who had a grey puckered face and a thin fringe of grey whisker very far under his chin, then spoke. "Come over here, Seamus Beg, and I'll measure you for a pair of shoes. Put your foot up on that root." The boy did so, and the leprechaun took the measure of his foot with a wooden ruler. "Now, Bridget Beg, show me your foot." And he measured her also. "They'll be ready for you in the morning." "Do you never do anything else but make shoes, sir?" said Seamus. "We do not," replied the leprechaun, "except when we want new clothes, and then we have to make them. But we grudge every minute spent making anything else except shoes, because that is the proper work for a leprechaun. In the night time we go about the country into people's houses, and we clip little pieces off their money, and so bit by bit we get a crock of gold together, because, do you see, a leprechaun has to have a crock of gold, so that if he's captured by menfolk, he may be able to ransom himself. But that seldom happens, because it's a great disgrace altogether to be captured by a man, and we've practiced so long dodging among the roots here that we can easily get away from them. Of course, now and again we are caught, but men are fools, and we always escape without having to pay the ransom at all. We wear green clothes because it's the color of the grass and the leaves, and when we sit down under a bush or lie in the grass, they just walk by without noticing us." "Will you let me see your crock of gold?" said Seamus. The leprechaun looked at him fixedly for a moment. "Do you like griddle bread and milk?" said he. "I like it well," Seamus answered. "Then you had better have some," and the leprechaun took a piece of griddle bread from the shelf and filled 2 saucers with milk. While the children were eating, the leprechauns asked them many questions. It was at this point that the thin woman of Inishmagroth had knocked upon the tree trunk and demanded that the children should be returned. When she had gone away, the leprechauns held a consultation, whereat it was decided that they could not afford to anger the thin woman and the she of Crogan Conghale. So they shook hands with the children and bade them good-bye. The leprechaun who had enticed them away from home brought them back again, and on parting he begged the children to visit Gort na Clockamora whenever they felt inclined. "There's always a bit of griddle bread or potato cake, and a noggin of milk for a friend," said he. "You're very kind, sir," replied Seamus, and his sister said the same words. As the leprechaun walked away, they stood watching him. "Do you remember," said Seamus, "the way he hopped and waggled his leg the last time he was here?" "I do so," replied Bridget. "Well, he isn't hopping or doing anything at all this time," said Seamus. "He's not in a good humour tonight," said Bridget, "but I like him." "So do I," said Seamus. End of excerpts from The Crock of Gold by James Stephens on Leprechauns. This recording is by Michelle Fry, Baton Rouge, Louisiana, in February 2021.
The Little People by Mabel Powers. Coffee Break Collection 30, Mythical Creatures. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. All children who live close to Mother Earth come to know and to see the fairies of the flowers, the woods, the rocks, and the waters. These fairies the Iroquois called Jo-Ga-O, or Little People, because they are so small. The Little People can do wonderful things. Whatever they wish, they can do. They can fly through the air. They can dart under or through the water, into the earth, and through the rocks, as they please, for they wear invisible moccasins and travel in winged canoes. Their wee babies are carried on their little mothers' backs, just like an Indian's papoose. The little fathers have wonderful winged bows and arrows that they can shoot at any distance they wish. The Little People bring good luck to the Indians. Whatever Indian boys and girls wish for, if they wish hard enough, that Jo-Ga-O will bring to them. It is said that there are 3 tribes of these Little People: those that live in the rocks beside the streams and lakes, those that hover near the flowers and plants, and those that guard the dark places under the earth. The Rock Little People are very strong. They can uproot large trees and can hurl great rocks. Sometimes they dare the Indians to a test of strength with them. They also like to play ball with stones. The Red Children fear the stone throwers, as they call them, but they love the little folk that help the flowers to blossom and the fruits and grains to grow and ripen. They remember these Little People in their feasts of Thanksgiving, for do the Jo-Ga-O not help the sweet waters of the maple to flow? Do they not whisper to the growing seeds and show the way to the light? Do they not guide the runners of the strawberries, turn the blossoms to the sun, and paint the berries red? They also tint the grains and give to the corn its good taste. A 3rd tribe of Little People dwell under the earth. They guard the sacred white buffaloes, and keep the serpent monsters that live in the darkness below from coming to the surface to the Red Children. There are trails that lead out to the sunlight, but the Little People guard them close, although sometimes a great serpent will find the trail of a spring and will follow it and poison the waters. Often at night these elves of the dark come to the upper world to dance with the other Little People. Whenever you find a tree in a deep, dark part of the wood, around which no grass will grow, there you may be sure a dance ring has been formed. There the Little People have danced till the moon dropped out of the sky. The Little People by Mabel Powers. Recording by Vincent Moraldo.
Oberon's Feast by Robert Herrick. Coffee Break Collection 30, Mythical Creatures. Recording by Andrea Atwood. Oberon's Feast by Robert Herrick. Shepcot, to thee the fairy state I with discretion dedicate, because thou prizest things that are curious and unfamiliar. Take first the feast, these dishes gone, we'll see the fairy court anon. A little mushroom table spread, after short prayers they set on bread, a moon-parched grain of purest wheat, with some small glittering grit to eat his choice bits with. Then in a trice they make a feast less great than nice. But all this while his eye is served, we must not think his ear was stirved, but that there was in place to stir his spleen the churring grasshopper, the merry cricket, puling fly, and piping gnat for minstrelsy. And now we must imagine first the elves present to quench his thirst a pure seed pearl of infant dew, brought and besweetened in a blue and pregnant violet, which done, his kittling eyes begin to run quite through the table, where he spies the horns of papery butterflies, of which he eats and tastes a little of what we call the cuckoo's spittle. A little fuzzball pudding stands by, yet not blessed by his hands, that was too coarse, but then forthwith he ventures boldly on the pith of sugared rush, and eats the sag and well bestrutted bee's sweet bag, gladdening his palate with some store of emmets' eggs. What would he more? But beards of mice, a newt's stewed thigh, a bloated earwig, and a fly, with the red-capped worm that's shut within the concave of a nut, brown as his tooth. A little moth, late fattened in a piece of cloth, with withered cherries, mandrake's ears, mole's eyes, to these the slain stag's tears, the unctuous dewlaps of a snail, the brocart of a nightingale overcome in music, with a wine ne'er ravished from the flattering vine, but gently pressed from the soft side of the most sweet and dainty bride, brought in a dainty daisy, which he fully quaffs up to bewitch his blood to height. This done, commended grace by his priest, the feast is ended. End of Oberon's Feast by Robert Herrick. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain.
The Ogre of Rashomon by Sadanami Sanjin, translated by Yi Theodora Ozaki. Coffee Break Collection 30, Mythical Creatures. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Joanna Schreck, Indianapolis. The Ogre of Rashomon by Sadanami Sanjin. Long, long ago in Kyoto, the people of the city were terrified by accounts of a dreadful ogre, who, it was said, haunted the gate of Rashomon at twilight, and seized whoever passed by. The victims missing were never seen again, so it was whispered that the ogre was a horrible cannibal, who not only killed the unhappy victims, but ate them also. Now everybody in the town and neighborhood was in great fear, and no one durst venture out after sunset near the gate of Rashomon. Now at this time there lived in Kyoto a general named Raiko, who had made himself famous for his brave deeds. Some time before this he made the country ring with his name, for he had attacked Oyama, where a band of ogres lived with their chief, who instead of wine drank the blood of human beings. He had routed them all and cut off the head of the chief monster. This brave warrior was always followed by a band of faithful knights. In this band there were 5 knights of great valor. One evening, as the 5 knights sat at a feast quaffing sake in their rice bowls, and eating all kinds of fish, raw and stewed and broiled, and toasting of each other's healths and exploits, the first knight, Hojo, said to the others, "Have you all heard the rumor that every evening after sunset there comes an ogre to the gate of Rashomon, and that he seizes all who pass by?" The second knight, Watanabe, answered him, saying, "Do not talk such nonsense. All the ogres were killed by our chief Raiko at Oyama. It cannot be true, because even if any ogres did escape from that great killing, they would not dare to show themselves in this city, for they know that our brave master would at once attack them if he knew that any of them were still alive." "Then do you disbelieve what I say, and think that I am telling you a falsehood?" "No, I do not think that you are telling a lie," said Watanabe, "but you have heard some old woman's story which is not worth believing." "Then the best plan is to prove what I say, by going there yourself and finding out yourself whether it is true or not," said Hojo. Watanabe, the second knight, could not bear the thought that his companion should believe he was afraid, so he answered quickly, "Of course I will go at once and find out for myself." So Watanabe at once got ready to go. He buckled on his long sword and put on a coat of armor and tied his large helmet. When he was ready to start, he said to the others, "Give me something so that I can prove I have been there." Then one of the men got a roll of writing paper and his box of Indian ink and brushes, and the 4 comrades wrote their names on a piece of paper. "I will take this," said Watanabe, "and put it on the gate of Rashomon. So tomorrow morning, will you all go and look at it? I may be able to catch an ogre or 2 by then." And he mounted his horse and rode off gallantly. It was a very dark night, and there was neither moon nor star to light Watanabe on his way. To make the darkness worse, a storm came on. The rain fell heavily and the wind howled like wolves in the mountains. Any ordinary man would have trembled at the thought of going out of doors. But Watanabe was a brave warrior and dauntless, and his honor and word were at stake. So he sped on into the night, while his companions listened to the sound of his horse's hooves dying away in the distance, then shut the sliding shutters close, and gathered round the charcoal fire, and wonder what would happen, and whether their comrade would encounter one of those horrible Oni. At last Watanabe reached the gate of Rashomon, but peer as he might through the darkness, he could see no sign of an ogre. "It is just as I thought," said Watanabe to himself. "There are certainly no ogres here. It is only an old woman's story. I will stick this paper on the gate, so that the others can see I have been here when they come tomorrow, and then I will take my way home and laugh at them all." He fastened the piece of paper signed by all his 4 companions on the gate, and then turned his horse's head towards home. As he did so, he became aware that someone was behind him, and at the same time a voice called out to him to wait. Then his helmet was seized from the back. "Who are you?" said the Watanabe fearlessly. He then put out his hand and groped around to find out who or what it was that held him by the helmet. As he did so, he touched something that felt like an arm. It was covered with hair and as big round as the trunk of a tree. Watanabe knew at once that this was the arm of an ogre, so he drew his sword and cut at it fiercely. There was a loud yell of pain, and then the ogre dashed in front of the warrior. Watanabe's eyes grew large with wonder, for he saw that the ogre was taller than the great gate. His eyes were flashing like mirrors in the sunlight, and his huge mouth was wide open, and as the monster breathed, flames of fire shot out of his mouth. The ogre thought to terrify his foe, but Watanabe never flinched. He attacked the ogre with all his strength, and thus they fought face to face for a long time. At last the ogre, finding that he could neither frighten nor beat Watanabe, and that he might himself be beaten, took to flight. But Watanabe, determined not to let the monster escape, put spurs to his horse and gave chase. But though the knight rode very fast, the ogre ran on, and to his disappointment he found himself unable to overtake the monster, who was gradually lost to sight. Watanabe returned to the gate where the fierce fight had taken place, and got down from his horse. As he did so, he stumbled upon something lying on the ground. Stooping to pick it up, he found that it was one of the ogre's huge arms, which he must have slashed off in the fight. His joy was great at having secured such a prize, for this was the best of all proofs of his adventure with the ogre, so he took it up carefully and carried it home as a trophy of his victory. When he got back, he showed the arm to his comrades, who one and all called him the hero of their band and gave him a great feast. His wonderful deed was soon noised abroad in Kyoto, and people from far and near came to see the ogre's arm. Watanabe now began to grow uneasy as to how he should keep the arm in safety, for he knew that the ogre to whom it belonged was still alive. He felt sure that one day or other, as soon as the ogre got over his scare, he would come to try to get his arm back again. Watanabe therefore had a box made of the strongest wood and banded with iron. In this he placed the arm, and then he sealed down the heavy lid, refusing to open it for anyone. He kept the box in his own room and took charge of it himself, never allowing it out of his sight. Now one night he heard someone knocking at the porch, asking for admittance. When the servant went to the door to see who it was, there was only an old woman, very respectable in appearance. On being asked who she was and what was her business, the old woman replied with a smile that she had been nurse to the master of the house when he was a little baby. If the lord of the house were at home, she begged to be allowed to see him. The servant left the old woman at the door and went to tell his master that his old nurse had come to see him. Watanabe thought it strange that she should come at that time of night, but at the thought of his old nurse, who had been like a foster mother to him and whom he had not seen for a long time, a very tender feeling sprang up for her in his heart. He ordered the servant to show her in. The old woman was ushered into the room, and after the customary bows and greetings were over, she said, "Master, the report of your brave fight with the ogre at the gate of Rashomon is so widely known that even your poor old nurse has heard of it. Is it really true, what everyone says, that you cut off one of the ogre's arms? If you did, your deed is highly to be praised." "I was very disappointed," said Watanabe, "that I was not able to take the monster captive, which was what I wished to do, instead of only cutting off an arm." "I am very proud to think," answered the old woman, "that my master was so brave as to dare to cut off an ogre's arm. There is nothing that can be compared to your courage. Before I die, it is the great wish of my life to see this arm," she added pleadingly. "No," said Watanabe, "I am sorry, but I cannot grant your request." "But why?" asked the old woman. "Because," replied Watanabe, "ogres are very revengeful creatures, and if I open the box, there is no telling but that the ogre may suddenly appear and carry off his arm. I have had a box made on purpose with a very strong lid, and in this box I keep the ogre's arm secure, and I never show it to anyone, whatever happens." "Your precaution is very reasonable," said the old woman, "but I am your old nurse, so surely you will not refuse to show me the arm. I have only just heard of your brave act, and not being able to wait till the morning, I came at once to ask you to show it to me." Watanabe was very troubled at the old woman's pleading, but he still persisted in refusing. Then the old woman said, "Do you suspect me of being a spy sent by the ogre?" "No, of course I do not suspect you of being the ogre's spy, for you are my old nurse," answered Watanabe. "Then you cannot surely refuse to show me the arm any longer," entreated the old woman, "for it is the great wish of my heart to see for once in my life the arm of an ogre." Watanabe could not hold out in his refusal any longer, so he gave in at last, saying, "Then I will show you the ogre's arm, since you so earnestly wish to see it. Come, follow me," and he led the way to his own room, the old woman following. When they were both in the room, Watanabe shut the door carefully, and then, going towards a big box which stood in the corner of the room, he took off the heavy lid. He then called to the old woman to come near and look in, for he never took the arm out of the box. "What is it like? Let me have a good look at it," said the old nurse with a joyful face. She came nearer and nearer, as if she were afraid, till she stood right against the box. Suddenly, she plunged her hand into the box and seized the arm, crying with a fearful voice which made the room shake, "Oh joy! I have got my arm back again!" And from an old woman, she was suddenly transformed into the towering figure of the frightful ogre. Watanabe sprang back and was unable to move for a moment, so great was his astonishment. But recognizing the ogre who had attacked him at the gate of Rashomon, he determined with his usual courage to put an end to him this time. He seized his sword, drew it out of its sheath in a flash, and tried to cut the ogre down. So quick was Watanabe that the creature had a narrow escape, but the ogre sprang up to the ceiling and, bursting through the roof, disappeared in the mist and clouds. In this way the ogre escaped with his arm. The knight gnashed his teeth with disappointment, but that was all he could do. He waited in patience for another opportunity to dispatch the ogre, but the latter was afraid of Watanabe's great strength and daring, and never troubled Kyoto again. So, once more, the people of the city were able to go out without fear, even at night time, and the brave deeds of Watanabe have never been forgotten. End of The Ogre of Rashomon by Satonami Sanjin. Translated by Yi Theodora Ozaki. Recording by Joanna Schreck, Indianapolis.
The Phoenix by Lewis Spence. Coffee Break Collection 30, Mythical Creatures. Recording by Newgate Novelist. The Phoenix by Lewis Spence. So the 500 years came round again with a May moon, and the Bennu, the bird that finds new feathers in the fire, the bird that the Greeks call Phoenix, flew to the oasis. Time has ties and tethers for everything late or soon. She draweth the chains in her hands and the doomed to her pyre, and as cinders and shadows of cinders men remember their faces. And the Phoenix sought her a tree for her eyrie of flame, minding the sycamore of her last apotheosis, but boles and branches were gone, and a garden was growing, a garden of which the Phoenix knew not even the name, where lilies seemed ashen beside the burning of roses, and the hyacinth leaped as only its bloom hath knowing. And the Phoenix cried, I shall perish in blossoms burning, in curling flames of the hyacinth, over these embers that seem like roses. Ah, better in beauty to perish, to find new life through the fire of the rose returning, than through the anguish my desolate spirit remembers. Sweet resurrection shall spring through the flowers I cherish. Then sought the Phoenix a holocaust under the roses, bathing her golden plumes in the flowers' conflagration, till the hour when the torches blossomed in Egypt's cities. She cried, Not in flowers the spirit of fire reposes. I shall fly through night to the flame of my new creation. When all is spoken, pain is the swiftest of pities. Not from the ashes of beauty is man's resurrection. Out of the pain of that fierce and miraculous wonder, the fire of the spirit aflame with a noble endeavour, searing the sorrow and sin out of man's recollection. He that reshapeth his spirit in flame and in thunder, he shall stand up with the gods and the godlike forever. End of The Phoenix by Lewis Spence. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain.
The Phoenix Bird by Hans Christian Andersen. Coffee Break Collection 30, Mythical Creatures. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. In the Garden of Paradise, beneath the Tree of Knowledge, bloomed a rose bush. Here, in the first rose, a bird was born. His flight was like the flashing of light, his plumage was beauteous, and his song ravishing. But when Eve plucked the fruit of the tree of knowledge of good and evil, when she and Adam were driven from paradise, there fell from the flaming sword of the cherub a spark into the nest of the bird, which blazed up forthwith. The bird perished in the flames, but from the red egg in the nest there fluttered aloft a new one, the one solitary phoenix bird. The fable tells that he dwells in Arabia, and that every 100 years he burns himself to death in his nest. But each time a new phoenix, the only one in the world, rises up from the red egg. The bird flutters round us, swift as light, beauteous in color, charming in song. When a mother sits by her infant's cradle, he stands on the pillow, and, with his wings, forms a glory around the infant's head. He flies through the chamber of content, and brings sunshine into it, and the violets on the humble table smell doubly sweet. But the phoenix is not the bird of Arabia alone. He wings his way in the glimmer of the northern lights over the plains of Lapland, and hops among the yellow flowers in the short Greenland summer. Beneath the copper mountains of Fablon and England's coal mines he flies, in the shape of a dusty moth, over the hymn book that rests on the knees of the pious miner. On a lotus leaf he floats down the sacred waters of the Ganges, and the eye of the Hindu maid gleams bright when she beholds him. The phoenix bird, dost thou not know him? The bird of paradise, the holy swan of song. On the car of Thespis he sat in the guise of a chattering raven, and flapped his black wings, smeared with the lees of wine. Over the sounding harp of Iceland swept the swan's red beak. On Shakespeare's shoulder he sat in the guise of Odin's raven, and whispered in the poet's ear, "Immortality." And at the minstrel's feast he fluttered through the halls of the Wartburg. The phoenix bird, dost thou not know him? He sang to thee the Marseillaise, and thou kissest the pen that fell from his wing. He came in the radiance of paradise, and perchance thou didst turn away from him towards the sparrow who sat with tinsel on his wings. The bird of paradise, renewed each century, born in flame, ending in flame. Thy picture, in a golden frame, hangs in the halls of the rich, but thou thyself often fliest around, lonely and disregarded, a myth, the phoenix of Arabia. In paradise, when thou wert born in the first rose beneath the tree of knowledge, thou receivest a kiss, and thy right name was given thee, thy name, Poetry. End of The Phoenix Bird by Hans Christian Andersen. Recording by Vincent Maraldo.
Dokkaebi and His Pranks of Korean Fairy Tales by William Elliott Griffiths. Coffee Break Collection 30, Mythical Creatures. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Lewis West. Dokkaebi is the most mischievous sprite in all Korean fairyland. He does not like the sunshine or outdoors, and no one ever saw him on the streets. He lives in the sooty flues that run under the floors along the whole length of the house, from the kitchen at one end of it to the chimney hole in the ground at the other end. He delights in the smoke and smut and does not mind fire or flame, for he likes to be where it is warm. He has no lungs, and his skin and eyes are both fireproof. He is as black as night and loves nothing that has white in it. He is always afraid of a bit of silver, even if it be only a hairpin. Dokkaebi likes most to play at night in the little loft over the fireplace. To run along the rafters and knock down the dust and cobwebs is his delight. His favorite game is to make the iron rice pot lid dance up and down so that it tumbles inside the rice kettle and cannot easily be got out again. Oh, how many times the cook burns, scalds, or steams her fingers in attempting to fish out that pot lid when Dokkaebi has pushed it in. How she does bless the sooty imp. But Dokkaebi is not always mischievous, and most of his capers hurt nobody. He is such a merry fellow that he keeps continually busy, whether people cry or laugh. He does not mean to give anyone trouble, but he must have fun every minute, especially at night. When the fire is out, how he does chase the mice up and down the flues, under the floor, and up in the garret over the rafters. When the mousies lie dead on their backs with their toes turned upward, the street boys take them outdoors and throw them up in the air. Before the mice fall to the ground, the hawks swoop down and eat them up. Many a bird of prey gets his breakfast in this way. Although Dokkaebi plays so many pranks, he is kind to the kitchen maids. When after a hard day's work one is so tired that she falls asleep, he helps her to do her hard tasks. Dokkaebi washes their dishes and cleans their tables for good servants, so when they wake up, the girls find their work done for them. Many a fairy tale is told about this jolly sprite's doings. How he gives good things to the really nice people and makes the bad ones mad by spitefully using them. They do say that the king of all the Dokkaebis has a museum of curiosities and a storehouse full of gold and gems and fine clothes, and everything sweet to eat for good boys and girls and for old people that are kind to the birds and dumb animals. For bad folks he has all sorts of things that are ugly and troublesome. He punishes stingy people by making them poor and miserable. The Dokkaebi king has also a menagerie of animals. These he sends to do his errands, rewarding the good and punishing naughty folks. Every year, the little almanac with red and green covers tells in what quarter of the skies the Dokkaebi king lives for that year, so that the farmers and country people will keep out of his way and not provoke him. In his menagerie, the kind creatures that help human beings are the dragon, bear, tortoise, frog, dog, and rabbit. These are all man's friends. The cruel and treacherous creatures in Dokkaebi's menagerie are the tiger, wild boar, leopard, serpent, toad, and cat. These are the messengers of the Dokkaebi king to do his bidding when he punishes naughty folks. The common, everyday Dokkaebi plays fewer tricks on the men and boys and enjoys himself more in bothering the girls and women. This, I suppose, is because they spend more time in the house than their fathers or brothers. In the land of rat-tat-tat, where the sound of beating the washed clothes never ceases, Dokkaebi loves to get hold of the women's laundry sticks, which are used for pounding and polishing the starched clothes. He hides them so that they cannot be found. Then Daddy makes a fuss because his long white coat has to go without its usual gloss, but it is all Dokkaebi's fault. Dokkaebi does not like starch because it is white. He loves to dance on Daddy's big black hat case that hangs on the wall. Sometimes he wiggles the fetish or household idol that is suspended from the rafters. But most of all, he enjoys dancing a jig among the dishes in the closet over the fireplace, making them rattle and often tumble down with a crash. Dokkaebi likes to bother men sometimes too. If Daddy should get his top knot caught in a rat hole, or his head should slip off his wooden pillow at night and he bump his nose, it is all Dokkaebi's fault. When anything happens to a boy's long braid of hair that hangs down his back and makes him look so much like a girl, Dokkaebi is blamed for it. It is even said that naughty men make compacts with Dokkaebi to do bad things, but the imp only helps the man for the fun of it. Dokkaebi cares nothing about what mortal men call right or wrong. He is only after fun and is up to mischief all the time, so one must watch out for him. The kitchen maids and the men think they know how to circumvent Dokkaebi and spoil his tricks. Knowing that the imp does not like red, a young man when betrothed wears clothes of this bright color. Dokkaebi is afraid of shining silver too, so the men fasten their topknots together and the girls keep their chignons in shape with silver hairpins. The magistrates and government officers have little storks made of solid silver in their hats, or else these birds are embroidered with silver thread on their dresses. Everyone who can afford them uses white metal dishes and dresses in snowy garments. Dokkaebi likes nothing white, and that is the reason why every Korean likes to put on clothes that are as dazzling as hoar frost. Tons and mountains of starch are consumed in blanching and stiffening coats and skirts, sleeves and stockings. On festival days, the people look as if they were dipped in starch and their garments encrusted in rock candy. In this manner, they protect themselves from the pranks of Dokkaebi. End of Dokkaebi and his pranks, recorded by Lewis West.
The Unicorn by Rainier Maria Rilke. Coffee Book Collection 30. Mythical Creatures. The saintly hermit, midway through his prayers, stopped suddenly and raised his eyes to witness the unbelievable. For there before him stood the legendary creature, startling white, that had approached, soundlessly, pleading with his eyes. The legs, so delicately shaped, balanced a body wrought of finest ivory, and as he moved, his coat shone like reflected moonlight. High on his forehead rose the magic horn, the sign of his uniqueness, a tower held upright by his alert yet gentle, timid gait. The mouth, of softest tints of rose and gray, when opened slightly, revealed his gleaming teeth, whiter than snow. The nostrils quivered faintly. He sought to quench his thirst, to rest and find repose. His eyes looked far beyond the saint's enclosure, reflecting vistas and events long vanished, and closed the circle of this ancient mystic legend. End of The Unicorn by Rainier Maria Rilke. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain.
In Praise of Unicorns by James Huneker. Coffee Break Collection 30. Mythical Creatures. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The lion and the unicorn were fighting for the crown. The lion beat the unicorn all round the town. In the Golden Book of Wit and Wisdom, Through the Looking Glass, the unicorn rather disdainfully remarks that he had believed children to be fabulous monsters. Alice smilingly retorts, "Do you know, I always thought unicorns were fabulous monsters too. I never saw one alive before." "Well, now that we have seen each other," said the unicorn, "if you'll believe in me, I'll believe in you. Is that a bargain?" "Yes, if you like," said Alice. No such ambiguous bargains are needed to demonstrate the existence of unicorns. That is, not for imaginative people. A mythical monster, a heraldic animal. He figures in the dictionary as the monoceros, habitat India, and he is the biblical Urus, sporting one horn, a goat beard, and a lion's tail. He may be all these things for practical persons. No man is a genius to his wife, but maugre that he is something more for dreamers of dreams, though not the hippogriff with its liberating wings, volplaning through the fourth dimension of space, nor yet is he tender Undine, spirit of fountains, of whom the unicorn asked, "By the waters of what valley has jealous mankind hidden the source of your secrets?" Cousin german to the centaur of Maurice de Guira, he can speak in like cadence. Alice, with her dreaming eyes of wonder, was, after the manner of little girls, somewhat pragmatic. She believed in unicorns only when she saw one. Yet we must believe without such proof. Has not the book of Job put this question, "Canst thou bind the unicorn with his band in the furrow?" As if a harnessed unicorn would be credible. We prefer placing the charming monster with the prancing tiny hooves of ivory. Surely Chopin set him to musical notation in his capricious second étude in F, Chopin, who, if man were soulless, would have endowed him with one. In the same category as the chimera of The Temptation of St. Antony, which thus taunted the Sphinx, "I am light and joyous. I offer to the eyes of men dazzling perspectives with paradise in the clouds above. I seek for new perfumes, for vaster flowers, for pleasures never felt before." With unicorns we feel the nostalgia of the infinite, the sorcery of dolls, the salt of sex, the vertigo of them that skirt the edge of perilous ravines or straddle the rim of finer issues. He dwells in equivocal twilights, and he can stare the sun out of countenance. The enchanting unicorn boasts no favored zone. He runs around the globe. He is of all ages and climes. He knows what fantastic land of Gautier, which contains all the divine lost landscapes ever painted, and whose inhabitants are the lovely figures created by art in granite, marble, or wood, on walls, canvas, or crystal. Betimes he flashes by the nymph in the brake, and dazzled she sighs with desire. Mallarmé set him to cryptic harmonies, and placed him in a dim, rich forest. though he called him a faun in retortion. Like the apocryphal Sathuzag in Flaubert's cosmical drama of dreams, which bore 74 hollow antlers from which issued music of ineffable sweetness, our unicorn sings ravishing melodies for those who possess the inner ear of mystics and poets. When angered, he echoes the 7 thunders of the apocalypse, and we hear of desperate rumors of fire, flood, and disaster. And he haunts those ivory gates of sleep whence come ineffable dreams to mortals. He has always fought with the lion for the crown, and he is always defeated, but invariably claims the victory. The crown is art, and the lion, being a realist born, is only attracted by its glitter, not the symbol. The unicorn, an idealist, divines the inner meaning of this precious fillet of gold. Art is the modern philosopher's stone and the most brilliant jewel in this much contested crown. Eternal is the conflict of the real and the ideal, Aristotle and Plato, Alice and the unicorn, the practical and the poetic, butterflies and geese, and rare roast beef versus the impossible blue rose, and neither the lion nor the unicorn has yet fought the battle decisive. Perhaps the day may come when, weariness invading their very bones, they may realize that they are as different sides of the same coveted shield, matter and spirit, the multitude and the individual. Then unlock the ivory tower, abolish the tyrannies of superannuated superstitions, and give the people vision, without which they perish. The divine rights of humanity, no longer of kingly cabbages. The dusk of the future is washed with this silver of hope, the lion and the unicorn in single yoke. Strength and beauty should represent the fusion of the ideal and the real. There should be no anarchy, no socialism, no brotherhood or sisterhood of mankind, just the millennium of sense and sentiment. What title shall we give that faraway time, that longed-for utopia? With Alice and the Faun we forget names, so let us follow her method when in doubt and exclaim, "Here then, here then!" Morose and disillusioned souls may cry aloud, "Ah, to see behind us no longer, on the lake of eternity, the implacable wake of time." Nevertheless, we must believe in the reality of our unicorn. He is Pan, he is Puck, he is Shelley, he is Ariel, he is whim, he is irony, and he can boast with Emerson, "I am owner of the sphere, of the 7 stars and the solar year, of Caesar's hand and Plato's brain, of Lord Christ's heart and Shakespeare's strain." End of In Praise of Unicorns by James Huneker.
Unknown Birds by Anne Higginson Spicer. Coffee Break Collection 30, Mythical Creatures. Recording by Newgate Novelist. Unknown Birds by Anne Higginson Spicer. Sweet is the bobolink's song as he balances high on the grasses. The catbird trills all the day long, mocking each rival who passes. There's a twitter of joy and of cheer to be heard in the sparrow's grey flock, but the birds I am longing to hear are the phoenix, the dodo, the rock. Fine is the grey eagle's flight, and the dip of the swallows at even. The seagull's my special delight when he circles twixt ocean and heaven. The wild geese spread out in a V, swift whirs the frightened woodcock. But the birds whose flight I wish to see are the phoenix, the dodo, the rock. Red is the tanager's coat as he sings his low murmuring matin, brilliant the grosbeak's soft throat, and the oriole's vestments of satin. So gorgeous the cardinal is dressed that the Quaker wrens get quite a shock, but gayer, I'm sure, than the rest were the phoenix, the dodo, the rock. Audubon, every bird's friend, shall I find in the heavenly flock, when my bird hunting here's at an end, the phoenix, the dodo, the rock? End of Unknown Birds by Anne Higginson Spicer. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain.
The Werewolf by Marie de France. as written in English by Jeanette Marks. Coffee Break Collection 30, Mythical Creatures. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Maddie Ruth. Once upon a time, in the days of King Arthur, for later there are some lines in Malory's Morte d'Arthur which tells us that the story must have been true, there lived a man who for part of the week was a wolf. That is, he had the form and the appetite of a wolf, and was called a werewolf. But nobody knew that he was a werewolf for 3 days in the week. Not even his wife, whom he loved well and devotedly, knew what happened to her husband while he was away from her these 3 days every week. It vexed the wife very much that she did not know, but she was afraid to question her husband lest he be angry. At last, one day, she did question him. "Ask me no more," replied the husband, "for if I answered you, you would cease to love me." Nevertheless, she gave him no peace until he had told her that 3 days in the week, because of a spell which was over him, he was forced to be a werewolf, and that when he felt the change coming over him, he hid himself in the very thickest part of the forest. Then the wife demanded to know what became of his clothes, and he answered that he laid them aside. The wife asked where he put them. He begged her not to ask him, for only the garments made it possible for him to return to human shape again. But the wife cried and begged until the night her husband had told her all. "Wife," he said, "inside the forest, on a crossroad, is a chapel. Near the chapel, under a shrub, is a stone. Beneath that stone is a hole, and in that hole do I hide my clothes, until the enchantment makes it possible for me to take my human shape again." Now the wife was not a good wife. Instead of trying to help her husband to get free from the wolf shape he had to assume 3 days in every week, therefore she loathed him and was afraid of him. And what is worse still, she betrayed him to another knight. She took this other knight into her confidence and told him where her husband hid his clothes when the spell came upon him, and he took the form of a wolf. Thereupon, the knight to whom she had told this dreadful secret stole the clothes, and they hid them where the poor wolf could never find them again. After that, these two wicked people were married, while the poor wolf wandered about in the forest, grieving, for he had loved his wife well and truly. Some time after this, the king was hunting one day in the forest, and his hounds gave chase to a wolf. At last, when the wretched beast was in danger of being overtaken by the hounds and torn into 1,000 pieces, he fled to the king, seized him by the stirrup, and licked his foot submissively. The king was astonished. He called his companions, and they drove off the dogs, for the king would not have the wolf harmed. But when they started to leave the forest, the wolf followed the king and would not be driven away. The king was much pleased, for he had taken a great liking to the wolf. He therefore made a pet of the lonely beast, and at night he slept in the king's own chamber. All the courtiers came to love the wolf too, for he was a gentle wolf and did no one any harm. A long time had passed, when one day the king had occasion to hold a court. His barons came from far and near, and among them the knight who had betrayed the werewolf. No sooner did the wolf see him than he sprang at him to kill him. And had the king not called the wolf off, he would have torn the false knight to pieces. Everyone was astonished that this gentle beast could show such rage. But after the court was over, and as time went on, they forgot the beast's savage attack. At length, the king decided to make a tour throughout his kingdom, and he took his wolf with him, for that was his custom. Now the werewolf's false wife heard that the king was to spend some time in the part of the country where she lived, so she begged for an audience. But no sooner did she enter the presence chamber than the wolf sprang at her and bit off her nose. The courtiers were going to slay the beast, but a wise man stayed their weapons. "Sir," said the counselor, "we have all caressed this wolf, and he has never done us any harm. This young lady was a wife of a man you held dear, but of whose fate we none of us know anything. Take my counsel and make this lady answer your questions, so shall we come to know why the wolf sprang at her." This was done. The false knight who had married her was brought also, and they told all the wickedness they had done to the poor wolf. Then the king caused the wolf's stolen clothes to be fetched, but the wolf acted as if he did not see the clothes. "Sir," said the counselor, "if this beast is a werewolf, he will not change back into his human shape until he is alone." They left him alone in the king's chamber and put the clothes beside him. Then they waited for a long time. Lo, when they entered the chamber again, there lay the long-lost knight in a deep sleep on the king's bed. Quickly did the king run to him and embrace him, and after that he restored to him all his lost lands, and he banished the false wife with her second husband from the country. And they who were banished lived in a strange land, and all the girls among their children and grandchildren were without noses. End of The Werewolf by Marie de France.